After the breaking of the world, Ragnarok had passed. No thunder followed it, no echo, only a silence so vast that sound itself seemed ashamed to exist. The sky, one streak with the arrogance of gods, hung colorless above the shattered horizon, neither gray nor white, but something exhausted, as though all hues had bled out in the great unmaking. The wind crawled across the ruins like a wounded animal, dragging scent of salt, ash, and cold iron. Asa stood on a plain that had once been the sea. She could still see the ribs of drowned ships poking from the hardened sand like fossils of forgotten faiths. To the north, the mountains had folded upon themselves. To the south, what had been forests were now blackened veins of charcoal and glass. And above it all, no sun, no stars, not even the faint memory of dawn. She was not sure how long she had walked. Days had become indistinguishable, stripped of the old rhythm. Time after the end no longer flowed. It congealed, trembling like cooling blood. Yet she walked, because movement was the only rebellion left against stillness. The gods were gone. She had seen them fall, some roaring, some whispering, some laughing as though the final jest were theirs alone to understand. The world's heart had broken in their quarrel. Midgard had cracked open, spilling oceans into the roots of Yggdrasil, and even the great tree had burned, its branches collapsing in flaming arcs that became comets. But one god had not turned entirely to ash. It was near the edge of the old fjord that she found him, or what remained, a skeleton the size of a hill, half buried in soot and snow, its ribs arching toward the sky like the bones of a cathedral stripped of faith. She did not know which god it had been. The skull was shattered, and runes had been carved deep into the bone long after the flesh had gone. She felt no fear. By then, awe and terror had learned to share the same face. As she approached, she felt a faint warmth, absurd, impossible, pulsing from within the hollow of the rib cage. It flickered softly, not like flame but like memory, alive yet unhurried. She knelt, brushing away a layer of frost. There, nestled in the curve of the bone, was an ember that refused to die. It did not burn her hand when she touched it. Instead, it pulsed once, as if acknowledging her presence, and then steadied. Asa, daughter of no one, last of her village and witness to God's demise, stared at it for a long time. In the reflection of that small light, she saw something impossible. Color, a brief shimmer of gold inside the colorless world. She wept, though tears came dry as dust. The ember was not ordinary fire. Fire devours, this one remembered. When she pressed it closer to her chest, she heard whispers beneath its glow, faint voices overlapping like threads of wind through leaves. She could not understand their words, but she felt them: gratitude, grief, command. It was as though the flame carried the last sighs of creation, condensed into a single trembling breath. That night, she built a small shelter beside the god's bones. Not from hope. She no longer believed in such a fragile thing. But from habit, the act of gathering, tying, shaping gave her a rhythm against despair. And she placed the ember at the heart of the shelter, watching its light breathe against the walls. It never dimmed. Each morning, if morning could still be said to exist, she checked it. Each not night, she spoke to it, telling it stories of what the world had been, of meadows that hummed with bees, of storms that argued with the sea, of laughter echoing across harvest feasts. She told it so that someone, something, would remember. In those telling days, Asa understood that memory itself was an act of defiance. If the gods had burned everything, then to remember was to rebuild. Once, as she dozed near the ember, she dreamed of the past. In her dream, she walked through a hall lit by torches that burned blue instead of red. The air smelled of salt and iron, the scent of the old battles, when men still thought their courage could outsing fate. At the far end of the hall, a figure waited, tall, cloaked, faceless. When it spoke, its voice was both thunder and whisper. "You hold what we lost." She asked, "What is it?" "Not power," said the figure. "Responsibility." Then she woke, heart pounding, the ember pulsing brighter beside her as if it too had dreamed. Seasons, if such things still occurred, passed like ghosts. The world began to change, subtly, shyly. The air softened. Meltwater trickled between cracks of stone, hesitant as a newborn's breath. The sky, though still pale and hollow, began to hint at blue, and where her footprints lingered, stubborn moss grew, small green defiance against oblivion. She knew it was the ember's doing. She could feel its warmth deepening, not outwardly consuming, but inwardly coaxing the earth to remember itself. Once, when she held it close, she saw within its core the faint outline of a tree, a single branch flickering gold. Could it be Yggdrasil, reborn in miniature? Or was it merely her longing shaping the flame's illusion? Either way, she understood its message. The world wanted to return, but it needed guardians. One dusk, while gathering driftwood, Asa saw a movement at the horizon, a silhouette staggering toward her camp. Instinct drew her blade, though it was dull and cracked. As the figure came closer, she realized it was no god, no beast, but another survivor, a man wrapped in torn furs, his eyes sunken yet burning with disbelief. He looked at the ember and felt his knees. "It lives," he whispered. "You kept the last fire." Asa said nothing. Words had grown too heavy for speech. Instead, she offered him water. He drank greedily, then laughed, a sound so strange and human that she almost forgot the world was broken. They built a larger shelter together. He called himself Ivar, once a blacksmith of Trondheim before the seas boiled. He told her that across the lands there were others, a few scattered souls who had seen sparks like hers, fleeting lights in ruined valleys. Perhaps the gods had left fragments of themselves behind. Asa listened but did not answer. She knew her ember was different. She had seen it breathe. Nights grew less cruel. The wind no longer screamed but hummed, carrying tones of something like music. One morning, Asa woke to find faint frost patterns etched on the shelter wall. Runes she had not carved. She traced them and felt warmth spread through her fingertips. Protect, share, remember. The same 3 commands, again and again. The flame pulsed brighter as she read. She turned to Ivar. "It's speaking." He nodded. "Then we must listen." They began to travel, carrying the ember in a bronze bowl forged from a god's shattered armor. Wherever they placed it, the ground warmed, seeds sprouted, and air brightened. Birds returned, not the same as before, smaller, quieter, but alive. Word spread among the survivors. 2 wanderers walking with a fragment of dawn. People sought them, bringing offerings, songs, carvings, prayers. Asa accepted them all. She no longer saw herself as chosen, but as necessary. Years blurred. Villages rose again, fragile, humble, but real. Children were born under skies that dared to blush with faint color. And always, at the heart of each new settlement, Asa placed a spark from her ember, dividing it yet never diminishing its core. Fire begot fire, but this flame did not consume. It remembered. It burned quietly, as though aware of its own history, each flicker carrying the memory of what it once destroyed and what it had since healed. The new fires Asa kindled across the lands were not born of hunger, but of reverence. Their warmth lingered like thought, never too much, never reaching beyond what the air could bear. One evening, she and Ivar rested beside one such hearth, a small, humble flame sheltered by stones blackened from age. The night outside howled with wind, but inside, the glow painted their faces with peace. The silence between them was companionable, filled with the kind of understanding that no longer required words. At length, Ivar spoke. His voice had grown soft with years, though it still carried the strength of an old mountain. "Perhaps," he said, "we were not meant to survive the gods. Perhaps we were meant to forgive them." Asa turned to look at him. In the reflection of firelight, his eyes gleamed like cooled iron, strong, patient, resigned. She said nothing at first. The flame danced between them, and within it, she saw shapes moving, vast silhouettes of things once divine. Not wrathful, not proud, simply weary. "Forgiveness," she murmured, "is another kind of creation." He smiled faintly. "Then we become creators in their place." The fire popped softly, as though in agreement. They sat together until the embers faded into red dust. 2 quiet figures, keeping the balance between what was gone and what was learning to return. When Ivar died, quietly, in his sleep, Asa did not weep. Grief had long since been braided into her spirit. not as pain but as rhythm. She buried him beneath the roots of a young ash tree, whose slender branches reached toward the clouds like questions. She placed a single spark atop his grave. The flame sank gently into the soil, leaving no smoke, only warmth. By morning, the tree glowed faintly from within, its bark veined with light. Birds perched on its branches and sang again, hesitant, imperfect, but real. Asa continued alone, older now but unbroken. She carried the original ember in a small iron casket wrapped in cloth. Sometimes she spoke to in the quiet hours. Sometimes she simply listened. Over the years, the voices inside had softened. No longer commanding, no longer divine. Their tones closer now to lullabies sung by tired guardians. Through those years, Asa came to understand something that once eluded her. The ember was not merely divine residue. It was a distilled will of every creature that had ever longed for continuity. It was a memory of striving, the refusal to end. In it lived every cry, every hope, every small rebellion against nothingness. Centuries folded and unfolded like waves. Villages grew where once there had been ashes. Children were born beneath skies that dared to change color again. Asa did not age as mortals did, not visibly, not in the way of skin and bone. Yet time shaped her gently all the same. Her hair gleamed with faint threads of gold when sunlight touched it. Her eyes reflected the flame even in darkness. When she walked, the ground beneath her feet warmed for a heartbeat longer than it should have. People began to whisper. Some called her the fire-bearer, others the keeper of the last breath. They built shrines of simple stone in her path, each with a single lamp burning from her gift. She disliked the reverence, but accepted the duty, knowing the embers was not her own to hoard. And in quiet moments, she wondered whether she was still entirely human. Her dreams changed first. She walked again among the gods, not as a servant or challenger, but as a witness. They were no longer vast or terrible. They appeared like shadows carved from longing. Their voices trembled with regret. They did not demand her worship. They asked for her forgiveness. We forgot, they whispered, that even eternity must bend. Asa forgave them. Each time, she did so not for their sake, but because to hold anger was to dim the ember's light. To forgive was to keep the fire breathing. Then came the thousand winter. The wind stilled, and the sky, once colorless, shifted. Faint bands of violet and pale gold unfurled across the horizon. The sea, long dead and still as glass, began to move again, whispering apologies to the shore. The frozen forest crackled with new green. Above all of it shimmered a light not of the old sun, but of something gentler, a glow born from the memory of all things that had refused to vanish. Asa knew what it meant. The world no longer needed her to carry the ember. It had remembered its own warmth. She climbed a mountain of bones where her journey had begun, the place where she found the ember nestled in the ribs of a fallen god. The path was steep, but not cruel. Snow gave way before her steps, and the wind guided rather than resisted her. When she reached the summit, the horizon burned with color, and the sea below gleamed like liquid dawn. She knelt beside the ancient ribcage, brushing away centuries of frost. The bones hummed faintly, recognizing her touch. With reverence, she opened the iron casket. The ember pulsed brightly, alive, eager, as though it too remembered the beginning. "Your watch is done," she whispered, "but the world still remembers." She hesitated, fingers trembling, then pressed her palm to the bone. Her warmth seeped into the ancient structure, her breath, her years, her gratitude. The ember flared, rising in brilliance until the entire skeleton glowed from within, like dawn caught in crystal. The light spread outward in waves, touching the sea, the forests, the valleys below. When it faded, there was no sound, only peace. And where Asa had knelt, there was no body, only a shimmer of heat, a small whisper of fire caught on the wind. In the centuries that followed, people told stories of a spirit wandering the twilight hills, a woman of dusk and flame carrying a spark cupped in her palms. Wherever she walked, winter softened. Seeds germinated early. Songs came unbidden to the lips of those who had forgotten joy. They built temples not to the old gods, but to her, though she had never asked for worship. They called her Asa the Rememberer, guardian of the ember that would not die, keeper of the last promise between gods and mortals. And in those temples, at the heart of every flame, if one listened closely enough, a voice could still be heard. Not divine, not distant, but warmly human. Protect, share, remember. The command had become a prayer. The prayer had become the heartbeat of the world reborn. And as the new dawn touched every corner of the living earth, its light carried her memory forward. Not as legend, not as law, but as proof that even fire, once it learns to remember, can choose to heal. The keeper of thunder. The embers still breathed inside the ribcage of the fallen god, and Asa still watched it, patient as a tide, unblinking as eternity. It was not a fire in the mortal sense. It neither consumed nor grew cold. It pulsed softly, a heart remembering what warmth used to mean. The wind hissed faintly through the bones above it, a sound halfway between a hymn and a sigh. It had been many seasons since she had last heard laughter. The world had gone quiet in its survival. The wind made no jokes now. The birds that once scolded the dawn were bones turned to dust. Even the sea, once boastful, full of itself, had forgotten the rhythm of waves. Its voice, which had once taunted cliffs and whispered to lovers, now murmured only in its sleep. So when Asa heard a sound that was not silence, she froze. It began as a tremor, a vibration rolling beneath her feet. Faint as memory, yet persistent. The ground itself seemed to hum in recognition. Then the air trembled, carrying something old and half-remembered, a low, rhythmic growl that rose through the stillness like an echo refusing extinction. The echo of thunder. Asa stood, her breath misting in the pale air. On the horizon, through drifting ash and lightless snow, a figure approached. He moved like someone following forgotten rhythm, cloak whipping behind him though no wind blew. The ground crackled faintly with each step he took. When he came closer, she saw he carried a glass vessel the length of his forearm, sealed with a cork carved from bone. Inside, light swirled, neither gold nor white, but that peculiar shade of deep, private blue one glimpses behind closed eyelids when lightning flashes far away. The stranger stopped a few paces from her fire. His presence disturbed the ash on the ground, which danced briefly before settling again. "Do you guard it?" he asked. His voice was deep but uncertain, as though in use of being heard. Asa inclined her head. "And you? What do you carry that still remembers a storm?" He lifted the bottle slightly. "Thunder," he said, "caught before the world ended." She almost smiled. "Impossible." He shrugged, the motion weary but unashamed. "So was surviving." His name was Corey. Once, long ago, he had been a herdsman on the southern cliffs where storms came to rest after devouring the sea. He had spent years listening to the sky, learning its moods as one might learn the temperament of a god. When the first omens of Ragnarok came, when lightning began to strike upward instead of down, Corey had not prayed. He had listened. He discovered that thunder was not merely sound. It was memory disguised as noise. When gods quarreled, when giants roared, when hearts broke loudly enough, the world echoed them, storing fragments of their courage and fury in the hollows of the sky. Corey had learned to hear those remnants, to distinguish wrath from grief, defiance from despair. In the final days before the heavens collapsed, he had done the unthinkable. He built a glass vessel, sealing within it one last surge of thunder, the echo of courage itself, captured before silence claimed the world. Now he offered it to her. Asa studied the vessel. The blue light within seemed to stir at her attention, swirling like breath trapped in liquid. It pulsed faintly, in rhythm with the ember's glow. "Why bring it here?" she asked at last. "Because you have the last fire," Corey replied, "and thunder belongs beside flame." It was not logic that convinced her, but recognition. The ember's glow leaned toward the bottle yearning, as though sensing its counterpart, the voice to its heartbeat. She gestured for him to sit. They shared silence first, as survivors do. He ate from her stores of dried roots and frost fruit. She poured melted snow into his cupped hands. Up close, she could see the road etched into him, his beard streaked with ash, his cloak mended with twine, his eyes older than the rest of him. When he finally spoke again, his words were slow, deliberate, as though the air might fracture under the weight of sound. "When I uncork it," he said, nodding to the bottle, "the world stirs." The air remembers how to move, only for a breath, but long enough to remind me that it still can. Asa watched him. And what do you think thunder is now without God's echo? He smiled faintly, a crooked human thing. It's what's left of courage. The gods use it to frighten us. But it also taught us that even sound could mean defiance. She looked back at the fire. Within its core, embers shifted like slow constellations. And now it needs a listener, Corey said softly. And you need a companion. The North calls to both of us. The North. The word itself felt heavy, holy. Beyond the drowned fjords lay the shattered ice, the last realm untouched by rebirth. Legends whisper of a heart sleeping there, older than frost, older than gods. The first silence, or perhaps the last dream. To walk there was to risk never returning. Yet Asa knew the truth of his words. Each time she faced north, the ember brightened, humming like a song it half remembered. She looked at him again. His gaze was steady, but behind it flickered the same paradox she carried. Grief wedded a purpose. Then we go north, she said. He bowed his head, as if accepting a long-delayed calling. Aye, the march of breath. They began their journey beneath a sky pale as bone. No sun marked their path, only the dim shimmer of lingering starlight. Days no longer had names. They measured time by their footsteps, by the breaths between words, by the rhythm of the ember's glow. The world they crossed was a mosaic of endings. Fields of black glass where oceans had boiled, forests of crystal trees that whisper when touched, rivers frozen mid-curve like thoughts half forgotten. Through it all, Asa walked ahead with the ember cradled in her hands, its light a thread guiding them through the ruins of divinity. Corey followed, the vessel of thunder slung at his hip. Sometimes it pulsed faintly, and he would hum an answer, a low tone that vibrated through the air. He never uncorked it, not yet, but Asa could feel its pressure, its longing to speak. Once, during a night without stars, he asked, "Do you think the gods sleep beneath us?" Asa didn't look up from a fire she was tending. "If they do, let them. The earth has enough to bear." Corey chuckled quietly. "Then perhaps we walk on their dreams." She smiled faintly. "Let's try not to wake them." Their laughter carried for a moment, and even the dead wind seemed to pause, remembering how to listen. As they moved northward, the ground began to change. Frost thickened, turning gray to silver. The silence no longer felt empty. It had texture now, alive with potential. The air trembled faintly beneath their feet. "The world's heart," Corey murmured one evening, touching the ice. "It's beating again." Asa nodded. "Then let's see what it's dreaming of." And so they walked onward, the flame-bearer and the keeper thunder, to the half-light of a world beginning to remember itself. The ember glowed brighter with every step, and somewhere within the glass vessel, the storm stirred, not in fury but in anticipation. The north awaited, and with it, whatever remained of hope. The land was a wasteland quilted with ice and ash. Skeleton forests reached toward them like frozen prayers. Rivers stood still, caught mid-flow by some forgotten command. Yet wherever Corey uncorked the bottle, air quivered, remembering its ancient dance. The frost retreated for a heartbeat. Dead branches trembled as if sighing. Then stillness reclaimed all. Asa watched in awe each time. The thunder trapped inside was not violent. It was sorrowful, like laughter trying to become tears. The first time she heard it, she dropped to her knees. "It mourns," she whispered. Corey nodded. Thunder always did. At night, they camped beneath the skeletons of mountains. The embers' warmth kept death in the air, and the bottle's faint rumble lulled them to uneasy sleep. Sometimes they dreamed of the same thing, a tree glowing with veins of molten light, rising from snow, its branches heavy with sound instead of fruit. The first storm. On the 23rd day, clouds appeared, real clouds, not the smeared ash that had haunted the sky for centuries. They gathered as if answering a summons, dark and unsure of their own existence. Corey felt the bottle grow warm in his hands. "It's calling to them." "Or they to it," Asa said. When he uncorked it this time, the sound that escaped was softer, rounder, a hum instead of a roar. Lightning flickered without striking, curling like silver vines through the cloud banks. Rain began, Not enough to soak, but enough to scent the air with memory. Asa tilted her head back, letting drops touch her face. "It remembers joy," she murmured. "This is how the world wept when it was young." The thunder answered, distant and kind. That night, the ember burned brighter, and in its glow the rain turned to sparks before touching the ground. The soil beneath them steamed. Life, tiny, green, trembling, peeked out between stones. Corey stared. "It's waking everything." Asa nodded. "Then we must keep going. If fire remembers warmth and thunder remembers courage, maybe the North still remembers creation." 3. The Valley of Echoes. They entered a canyon carved by forgotten floods. Every word they spoke returned multiplied, layered, distorted. But when Asa spoke the names of the gods, the echoes fell silent, refusing to repeat blasphemy. Here, the bottle quivered constantly, even corked. Corey carried it close, afraid to release its sound amid such fragile stillness. Yet one night, while Asa slept, he did. He wanted to test something, to see if thunder could teach silence to sing again. The effect was immediate. The air convulsed, roaring through the valley like an invisible beast. Rocks shuddered. The canyon's walls hummed. And then, impossibly, voices emerged, not human, not divine, but elemental. Fragments of storms long dead. "Who disturbs a resting wind?" they asked. Corey bowed his head. "One who remembers." The voices whispered through him, into him, until his veins glowed faintly blue. When Asa woke, she found him kneeling, trembling but alive. "What did it tell you?" she asked. "That thunder is not merely noise," he whispered. "It is the will to move forward. For the pact." By the next dawn, Corey was changed. The light of the bottle had seeped into his flesh, and faint rumblings echoed inside his chest. Sometimes, when he spoke, his voice carried undertones of distant storms. Asa watched him with wary respect. "You've bound yourself to it," she said. "I've joined the memory," he replied. "Every storm wants to continue its story." She touched the ember. So does fire. Between them, warmth and rumble began to merge, a low vibration that shaped the air around them. Birds began to follow, drawn by the pulse. Small animals crept from their dens. They had become, without realizing it, the new axis of the world's awakening, the North's edge. Weeks later they reached the glacier fields, the last barrier before the unlit horizon. Here the sky pressed low, heavy with old grief. Ice stretched in endless sheets, fractured by chasms that breathed cold mist. The ember flickered weakly now. Even fire hesitated in such cold. Corey's thunder bottle rattled softly, restless. "We're close," Asa said. "To what?" She looked into the white abyss. "To the place where sound and light are born together or die together." They built a small cairn to mark their camp, using stones that hung faintly under touch. That night, Corey dreamed of a vast mirror beneath the ice, reflecting not the sky but the memory of it. He saw himself standing beside Asa, holding both ember and thunder above the surface, and saw them merge into a single light too bright to name. When he woke, he said, "We have to join them." 6. The uncorking. At dawn, if dawn it was, they stood upon the glacier's highest ridge. Windless silence surrounded them, oppressive and pure. Corey uncorked the bottle. The world exhaled. Air surged, rolling outward in concentric waves. The glacier groaned. Clouds spun into motion. Snow rose from the ground like reverse rain. The thunder that escaped was not wrathful but jubilant, as if the sky were stretching after too long a sleep. Asa held the ember aloft, and its light expanded, merging with the swirling air. Gold met blue, warmth met motion. Where they touched, color bloomed red, green, violet, painting the sky for the first time since Ragnarok. And then silence again, but a living silence, one that listened back. 7. The aftersound. They descended into a world transformed. The ice beneath their feet had softened. Beneath the translucent surface, they saw rivers moving, fish darting, light bending through liquid. The wind carried voices, the sighs of elements returning to work. Corey laughed, half mad with awe. The air remembers. Asa smiled. And now the world can breathe again. For the first time, she heard something new. Not thunder, not flame, but heartbeat. The land itself pulsed. 8! The gift of movement. From that day onward, wherever they traveled, motion followed. Trees began to sway again. Seas began to rhythmically breathe. The world, once still, had learned again how to turn. Corey's bottle was empty now, but when he shook it, faint rumbles lingered, a memory of memory. The thunder had entered him entirely. His steps left patterns in the earth that echoed even after he passed. Asa's ember burned steadier, fed by wind. Fire, once chained to destruction, now danced for creation. Together they wandered north until there was no farther north to go, only a horizon of aurora light and mist. There they built the Hall of Breath, half carved from ice, half grown from flame, where travelers could come to feel the world move again. 9. The legacy. Generations later, the descendants of those travelers would tell the tale differently. Some said Corey had become the first storm of the New World, eternally chasing lightning across the heavens. Others claimed Asa turned into the living flame of the north, seen at dawn as a line of light rising between fjord and sky. But the truth was simpler and more divine. They had taught the air to remember. And so every gust, every whisper wind, every low rumble before rain is still Corey uncorking the bottle anew, still Asa lifting her ember to the sky. The world moves because they carried memory far enough north to become motion itself. The confession at the shore of glass. The tide moved like memory, slow, uncertain, as though relearning the act of returning. Asa and Corey reached the sea at last, or what remained of it. It was no longer water but glass, an endless plain of translucent shards melted together by divine fire. The surface shimmered under a sun that had only recently remembered how to rise. Each ripple of heat distorted the horizon, making it seem as if the world were breathing in slow, labored sighs. They walked carefully, for every step sang. Beneath their feet the fused sand chimed with delicate tones, as if the earth itself were whispering secrets too fragile to be spoken aloud. Corey's bottle, long empty of thunder, now held only silence. Asa's ember pulsed softly in her palm, casting halos of molten gold upon the reflective shore. This place, Corey said, was once a harbor. Asa nodded, and a temple stood beyond it. They called it the Gate of Dawn. Her voice faltered slightly on the last word. Even speaking of dawn still felt presumptuous, as if the world might revoke its return at any moment. They walked until the horizon grew blurred by rising heat, and that was where they saw him. A man stood knee-deep in what had once been tidewater, now hardened into crystal. His figure wavered with the air's distortion. When he turned toward them, the reflection fractured into many versions of him, all shimmering, all slightly off. He was broad-shouldered, his hair the pale color of ash, his skin sunburned from a sun too new to be gentle. His eyes were sea-gray, rimmed with something that looked like shame. "Travelers," he called out, his voice carrying across the glass plane in echoes that took longer than they should fade. "You walk with light." Asa and Corey exchanged a wary glance. "And you," Asa said, "stand on the bones of something sacred. Who are you?" The man hesitated before answering. "Brinjar," he said finally, "once a shield-bearer, once a destroyer." The wind fell still. Even the sound beneath their feet seemed to hush. They approached cautiously. Brinjar stepped forward, and the glass beneath him cracked but did not break. As he neared, Asa could see lines carved into his arms. Old runic scars, the kind soldiers once used to pledge allegiance to gods now gone. Some were burned over, as though he had tried to erase his oaths by pain alone. "I know what this place was," he said, voice low. "I helped end it." He gestured toward the far cliffs where the remnants of pillars jutted from the fused sand. They looked like broken fingers reaching for forgiveness. "There was a temple there," he continued. "It guarded the Dawnstone, the heart of the first sunrise. When the gods turned upon each other, we, the men who still serve them, were ordered to destroy it, to blind the world, so that no side could claim its light." He swallowed. His throat moved like stone grinding on stone. "I carried the torch that set its doors ablaze." Asa felt the ember in her hand grow warmer, pulsing faster. The light reflected in Brinjar's eyes, and for a moment it seemed to judge him. "You helped unmake the morning. she said. I did, he replied, and I have not slept since that day. Every dream burns with the faces of those who prayed inside when the roof fell. I have wandered the edges of this broken sea for what feels like ages, waiting for it to forgive me, but glass remembers flame. Corey watched him silently, his jaw tight. The faint hum of thunder still lived in his chest. He could sense truth when it spoke. Why now, he asked. Why reveal yourself? Bryn Jar knelt on one knee. The reflection of his bowed form rippled across the mirrored shore like a wound healing. Because I saw your fire from the cliffs, he said to Asa, and I knew it was the same light that Temple once kept. I have no words to undo what I did. Only strength left in my arms, and will left in my bones. Let me use them. He lowered his head. Let me help you carry it north. For a long time, neither Asa nor Corey spoke. The wind whispered across the plain, making faint harp sound from the cracked glass beneath them. Asa finally stepped closer. The ember brightened, its glow painting her face in gold. If you walk with us, she said softly, you walk under vow. This light does not forgive easily. I do not ask forgiveness, Bryn Jar said. Only purpose. Corey looked at Asa, his expression unreadable. We will need strength if we're to cross the glacier of smoke, he murmured. She nodded slowly. Then strength he shall give. That night, they camped amid the ruins of the temple's edge. The sea of glass glowed faintly with internal fire, as if it still remembered the day of its burning. Bryn Jar sat apart from them at first, staring into the horizon where molten reflections of the stars trembled in the hardened sea. Corey eventually joined him, setting down the bottle between them. You know, he said, I used to think thunder was just the gods shouting. Turns out it was the sky remembering courage. Maybe glass remembers courage too. Bryn Jar gave a faint smile. Then perhaps it can remember repentance. Asa approached with the ember cupped in her palms. She placed it between them, and its warmth spilled outward in concentric rings, softening the air. For a moment, the surface beneath their feet seemed to ripple, as if it wanted to turn back into water. Tell me, she said quietly, what did you see when the temple fell? Bryn Jar's eyes glistened. Not gods, just light running from itself. Silence followed, a silence that felt almost merciful. When dawn rose, if dawn could still be trusted, it did so shyly. The sun broke over the horizon like a cautious smile. The glass shore caught it and multiplied it into 1,000 shards of brilliance. The world seemed briefly young again. Asa watched as Bryn Jar knelt, pressing his scarred hands to the ground. The light that filtered through the broken ceiling of the temple shimmered like spilled memory. His reflection wavered in the water pool between slabs of ancient stone, not accusingly, not like an echo of guilt, but tenderly, as if the sea itself had decided to remember him kindly. For the first time, it seemed the world looked upon him without judgment. He whispered something. Words carried off before they reached anyone's ears, but Corey felt them nonetheless. The air shifted subtly. It was as though the rhythm of breath, wind, and heartbeat had aligned, like a chord long unresolved finally finding its home. The thunder that slumbered in his chest stirred faintly in answer. The ember in Asa's hand brightened, its glow steady and calm, like a heart responding to another's beat. For one fragile instant, everything, sky, sea, ruin, and living, breathed together. The broken temple exhaled warmth. Even the sea outside quieted, as though listening to its own forgiveness. They left the ruins that afternoon, walking north along the fractured coastline. The horizon shimmered with the slow silver of an unhurried tide. Bryn Jar carried their packs without complaint, his gait heavy but unburdened. Each time his boots touched the glassy sand, faint cracks spread outward, symmetrical and precise, forming patterns that, when seen from above, resembled runes of protection. Corey noticed first. You're leaving marks, he said, half in awe, half in disbelief. Bryn Jar glanced down and smiled faintly. Then let the world read my apology. Asa turned back once before the horizon swallowed the temple entirely. The pillars still stood gleaming in the distance, their fractured tops catching the late light, like torches relit after ages of wind. The sea around them mirrored the color of healing wounds, soft pinks fading to gold. Perhaps dawn was never lost, she murmured, only misplacing our guilt. They traveled until night fell, the coastline breaking open into the mouth of a wide valley where the air shimmered faintly with old blue light, the residue of forgotten enchantment. The sand there was mixed with salt and ash, glowing dimly in patches, as though remembering when gods had walked upon it. They built a small fire from driftwood that had somehow survived the burning of the sea. Its flames burned low and clear, humming softly like a distant hymn to the ocean. The warmth licked their faces but did not consume. It was a kind of fire that remembered restraint. Bryn-Jar sat apart, cross-legged, his rough hands clasped together, head bowed. His eyes were fixed on the flame, but it was not reverence that held him. It was uncertainty. He feared the light might still reject him. Asa studied him through the flicker. She saw not a warrior, but a man who had once mistaken destruction for devotion. "What will you do when we reach the north?" she asked softly. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the sea sighing against stone and the occasional crack of cooling glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, gentler than before. "Whatever you ask of me. If the ember needs defending, I will fight. If it needs silence, I will stand watch. I have no wish to live beyond my usefulness." Corey frowned, leaning forward. "You speak like a man still waiting for punishment." Bryn-Jar met his gaze. "Perhaps I am." For a moment, the fire dimmed, as if listening to their sorrow. Then Asa lifted the ember from her pouch and held it toward him. Its light spilled across his weathered features. Soft, forgiving, she placed it in his open hands. Its warmth did not recoil. The glow spread along his fingers, climbing his forearms, tracing the lines of every old scar and softening them, filling them not with pain, but with quiet light. The air around them thickened with the scent of rain, as if the world itself had inhaled. "Then let this be your absolution," Asa said, not forgetting, but remembering differently. Bryn-Jar bowed his head, the ember resting in his palms. "Then I will carry it as it carries me." That night, as the fire dwindled to embers, Corey dreamed, in his dream. Thunder rolled through valleys made of glass, and Bryn-Jar stood in the storm's center with open hands. The lightning did not strike him. It bowed, and from that gesture came peace. When morning came, the dream seemed to have followed him into waking. The sky above the valley shimmered with pale color, rose, amber, faint green, the palette of dawn remembering itself. The ocean reflected it back, brighter this time, no longer fractured but whole. Asa smiled when she saw it. The warmth touched her face like recognition. "The temple may be gone," she said, "but dawn has chosen a new guardian." Bryn-Jar turned toward the horizon where sea met sky, where the light was weakest yet most beautiful. The reflection painted his face gold, washing over the lines time had carved there. For the first time since a confession, he stood tall, not in pride, but in peace. "Then let me carry it," he said simply, "until the world no longer needs guarding." The wolf, who had watched in silence, rose and walked beside him. It brushed its fur against his leg in wordless assent. Corey clapped a hand on Bryn-Jar's shoulder. "Then none of us walk behind anymore, only beside." And so they walked, Asa with her ember, Corey with the thunder's quiet memory, Bryn-Jar with his strength newly tempered by gentleness. Together they moved north, where the air smelled of beginnings. Behind them, the valley glowed faintly for many days, long after their footprints had vanished. From the cliffs above, travelers would later say that at dawn the sea shimmered as if lit from beneath by hidden fire, and the broken temple's columns blazed with reflected light. No one called it miracle. They called it mercy, the kind that does not erase, but teaches what remains to shine. And on that stretch of coast, where ruin met renewal, the sea finally remembered what dawn looked like, and refused ever after to forget. The huntress of snow. The world had grown quiet again. Not the death quiet of the ash years, but a stillness that trembled with waiting, like a hell breath before song. North of the glass shores, beyond where even thunder dared echo, stretched a wilderness of snow that had never melted. Each flake that fell seemed to pause midair, listening, before it landed. Asa, Corey, and Bryn-Jar trudged through it, leaving no tracks. The snow refused to remember footprints. It erased each step as soon as it was made. It was here, among drifts high as watchtowers, that they found her, or perhaps she found them. They first saw movement at twilight, a flicker against the white. A woman stood at the crest of a dune, her hair the color of moonlight, her bow drawn though no target was visible. She loosed the arrow and it vanished into the storm, but they all heard it sing. The sound was not the whistle of flight, but a chord, faint and harmonious, like the echo of branches swaying in distant wind. The snow itself responded, swirling into shapes that resembled leaves, roots, and veins of light. Corey gripped his staff. Who shoots music into a storm? The one who listens to it first. Asa murmured. When the storm subsided, the woman descended toward them. Her steps made no sound. She wore furs of white wolf and silver fox, but her eyes, pale green, like thawing ice, were older than her face. I heard your fire from afar, she said, her voice quiet yet resonant, as though spoken through layers of snow. It has been calling for me. Asa studied her warily. You hear fire? I hear everything that remembers warmth, the woman replied. She stopped a few paces away, gaze fixed on the ember cupped in Asa's palms. It has a name. Would you like to know it? Corey's pulse quickened. And who are you to name what even gods could not? The huntress smiled faintly. I do not name. I remember. My name is Iravel, and I am what remains of the whisperers, those who listen to the snow. No one spoke. The wind gathered, soft but insistent, brushing against them like invisible fingers. It carried faint words, fragments, sighs, the ghost of language. Iravel tilted her head, listening. Then gently, it says you carry the world seed. The air itself seemed to tremble. Asa clutched the ember closer. The what? Iravel's gaze did not waver. A sliver of Yggdrasil's heartwood, torn free when a world tree burned. The last pulse of its sap hardened into light. It sleeps as ember now, but if tended rightly, it can teach the sun to rise. Corey exhaled, stunned. Brynjar crossed himself in an old gesture of awe. You mean is alive, Asa said slowly. Alive and listening, Iravel replied. Do you not hear it breathe? Asa strained, and for the first time she caught it, a faint rhythm beneath the crackle, like roots drinking through silence. It grows, the huntress said, not upward, but outward, through time, through thought. You have carried it far enough for it to remember what it is. They followed her into a valley that glowed faintly blue in the night. The snow here was strange. It shifted like mist, whispering secrets of the past to anyone who dared to listen. Iravel led them to a hollow where the wind formed no path. There, frost clung to the rocks in patterns that resembled bark. This was once a root, she said softly, kneeling. Part of the tree. The snow still remembers its voice. She drew a dagger of bone and pressed it into the frost. A resonance spread, low, deep, ancient. The ground beneath them hummed, and through the thin snow they saw shapes forming, veins of pale light threading outward like capillaries of dawn. Corey felt the echo in his bones. It's answering you. It is answering her, Iravel corrected, nodding to Asa. The seed recognizes its keeper. Asa hesitated. Keeper, not owner. No one owns what remembers everything. Iravel said, the world seed chooses who will help it remember itself. She gestured for Asa to place the ember upon the frost. The light spilled outward, merging with the glowing veins beneath. The snow around them shimmered, and for a moment the air filled with the scent of sap and summer rain, scents no one had smelled since the gods died. A vision overtook them. They saw the tree as it once was, immense, infinite, each root spanning worlds, each branch holding stars like lanterns. They heard its heart, not a beat but a rhythm of wind, sea, and time moving in unison. Then came the breaking. Fire through its veins, God shouting, skies collapsing. A single fragment of that burning heart flung away, falling like a meteor into the mortal realm. Asa gasped, clutching her chest. The vision dissolved, leaving her breath steaming in the cold. The seed survived, Iravel said softly. It fell where hope refused to die, inside the bones of God. You found it, Asa, but it was never lost. It was waiting. Brynjar knelt beside the ember, all softening the lines of his face. If it can teach the sun to rise, he said, then why hasn't it? Irovel turned to him, eyes reflecting starlight. Because the sun is not a thing in the sky. It is a memory inside every living being. To rise again, it must be taught, reminded. The seed does not command light. It persuades it. Corey frowned. Then what must we do? Not much, she said, smiling faintly. Only listen as it listens. The tree grew not by force, but by harmony. You must carry its song northward, where the roots still sleep beneath the glacier smoke. There its memory can touch its source. Asa bowed her head. You speak as though you have walked that path. Irovel's expression darkened. Once, and lost everyone who walked with me. That night, they sat around a small fire. The ember dimmed again to rest, content after revelation. Snow fell gently, and the flakes sang as they touched the flames, vanishing with a faint whisper like tiny farewells. Irovel's bow lay across her knees. She traced its curve as one might comfort a sleeping child. The world isn't broken, she said. It is remembering how to be whole. But memory is heavy, and only those who've lost everything can carry it far enough. Corey stared into the fire. Then we're already qualified. She smiled barely. Perhaps. The snow says you three walk with the rhythm of the old elements. Flame, motion, and muscle. But something more is needed. Someone who can translate what the world says into what hearts can understand. Asa met her eyes. You. Irovel inclined her head. If you'll have me. When dawn came, it came differently. The horizon blushed not from the sky downward, but from the ground upward, as if the world itself were glowing from within. The snow reflected gold, not white. Asa lifted the ember, and it flared in response. Tiny shoots of light spread from her fingers, curling into the air like luminous roots. The seed is awake, Irovel said quietly. It remembers its name. What name? Asked Brinjar. Irovel closed her eyes, listening to the whisper of falling snow. Then she spoke. Jartver, she said. The heartwood, the root that dreams the dawn. The air shimmered, and a warmth spread across the valley, melting frost in the shape of runes that glowed for only an instant before fading. The language of the world relearning itself. Corey's voice trembled. Then the sun will rise again? Irovel looked toward the east, where light was already seeping through the clouds, thin, hesitant bands of gold stretching across the gray sky, like the first lines of forgotten song. She stood very still, watching the color take shape. It wasn't the harsh glare of the old sun, but something gentler, a dawn that had learned humility. Not again, she said softly. Her breath made a small cloud in the cold morning air. Then, after a heartbeat, she added, for the first time, the others turned toward her. Asa, Corey, and Brinjar, and for a moment they simply stood there, for silhouettes on a frost-covered ridge, listening to the quiet pulse of the world below them. Even the wind had changed its voice. It no longer howled or mourned, but whispered like cloth being folded neatly after years of storm. Asa smiled faintly. For the first time, she repeated, sealing the words like a vow. And so they set out, the flame-bearer, the thunder-keeper, the penitent warrior, and the snow listener, on their pilgrimage toward the glacier smoke. It was said to rise at the top of the world, a remnant of the first fire and the last ice, where memory and forgetting slept intertwined. There, the sky had burned so fiercely during the breaking of the tree that even centuries later the air above it still shimmered with ghosts of color. They carried not just fire but remembrance. The ember Asa guarded in her hands, its pulse steady as a heartbeat. The thunder that still slept beneath Corey's ribs, ready to awaken at the whisper of storm. Brinjar's strength, tempered now with repentance rather than rage. And Irovel's gift, the snow listener's calm that could coax even silence into speaking. The ground beneath them was scarred with the remnants of old battles. Glass plains where fire had kissed the frost, skeletal forests where branches curled inward like hands in prayer. Yet life was returning in cautious ways. Moss crept along cracks in the stone. Streams thawed, whispering songs without melody. Even the air seemed to hum with shy promise. Each step they took was an act of faith, a declaration that the story was not yet over. The world's heart, once burned and broken, was dreaming again, and in that dream every small motion mattered. They walked until noon, when the sky brightened enough for shadows to return. It had been so long since the world had worn shadows that even their own surprised them. Corey laughed quietly and lifted his hand, watching the outline stretch across the ground. "I'd forgotten," he said. His voice, though faint from the trials they had endured, carried wonder. "How light makes us bigger than we are." Bryn Jar looked at his own, broad, scarred, trembling slightly with each breath. "Or smaller," he murmured, "depending on where we stand." Hrefna, quiet as always, smiled. "Shadows are just light resting," she said. "They mean the sun is still deciding where to shine." As they climbed the northern ridges, the air began to taste of smoke and frost, the strange marriage of warmth and cold that marked the glacier's domain. Every exhale formed small plumes that drifted upward, as though the sky itself was inhaling their courage. That night they camped on a plateau where the stars hung close, bright enough to read by. They shared the last of their dried fruit, passing it hand to hand without speaking. Conversation seemed unnecessary. They had said everything that could be said in words, and the rest lived between them in quiet understanding. Corey traced a rune in the frost beside the fire, a simple spiral, symbol of continuation. "For the first time," he whispered, repeating Iravel's words, and Asa nodded. The phrase had become their heartbeat. When she slept, Asa dreamed of the tree, its roots not beneath her but within her, winding through her veins like rivers of light. She saw it breathing, slow and vast, its leaves made of memory. And though it had fallen once, it was not dead. It had only learned to grow differently. Through them, through their choices, through every act of mercy sown in a scarred world. By morning, the glacier appeared on the horizon, a great curtain of white veined with shadow and smoke. It rose higher than mountains, but it didn't glisten. It shimmered, alive, as if made from the exhalations of countless lives still dreaming beneath its surface. Each breath of wind that passed through it sounded faintly like distant voices laughing, crying, praying, all at once. They descended into the valley below. The ground here was strange, half ice, half ash, soft enough that their feet left deep impressions. With every step, small clouds of silver dust rose behind them, catching the light and scattering it like pollen. Iravel paused and looked back. "Do you see it?" she asked. Corey frowned. "See what?" "The world remembering itself," she said, pointing to their footprints. The wind had begun to trace glowing lines of the paths they'd made, as if engraving their journey into the land skin. Asa smiled. "Then the world forgives us our wait." When they reached the glacier's base, the air was thick with memory. Each breath tasted like smoke and snow, sweetness and sorrow. They stood in silence, staring up at the wall of shifting ice. Colors moved slowly within it, reds like heartbeats, blues like thought, greens like new beginnings. Bryn Jar rested his palm against its surface. It was warm. "It breathes," he said softly. "Everything does," Asa answered. Even after ending, they knelt together, forming a circle, and placed the ember at the center. The ground pulsed faintly beneath it, recognizing something older than itself. Corey closed his eyes. The thunder in his chest rumbled once, not as a storm but as approval. Hrefna bowed her head, her breath aligning with the glacier's rhythm. Iravel looked at the horizon again, to where the newborn sun was climbing through its uncertainty. "For the first time," she said once more, this time with a smile so calm it stilled the wind. And there, at the foot of the glacier's smoke, the four companions felt the world stir beneath them, slow, deep, sure. Each step that had carried them here began to hum in memory. The earth exhaled. The sky leaned closer. The hard creation, long shattered, was dreaming itself whole again. And in that dream, the sun, awkward, radiant, imperfect, learned not to command the dawn, but to rise beside it. They reached the place where the sea had frozen in the act of rising. The wave towered above them, an impossible wall of blue glass, curved and trembling, caught mid-breath between collapse and continuation. Wind hissed through the hollows of its crest, carrying the faint sound of bells, though there were no bells anymore. The air was heavy with salt and old miracles. Every few moments, light moved within the wave, slow and mournful, as if something vast swam beneath the surface but could not break free. Asa stood at its base, her cloak whipped about by gusts that came from nowhere. The ember in her hand pulsed softly, reflecting upon the frozen wall, like a heart seen through ice. "We must cross," she said. The others stared upward, following the curve of the wave as it arched over them. A bridge made by catastrophe. Corey touched the surface. It was neither cold nor solid, but somewhere in between. His fingers sank slightly, as if the water still remembered being liquid. Suspended, he murmured. Time forgot what it meant to finish this motion. Iravelle closed her eyes. The snow listeners seemed to hear something within the wave, something that none of them could perceive. "It sings," she whispered, "but the song isn't meant for us. It's warning the stars." Bryn Jawr frowned. "The stars are gone." She shook her head. "Not gone. Drowned." They all looked down. The surface beneath their boots shimmered with faint constellations. Tiny points of light moving slowly within the ice, tilting and spinning like coins thrown into deep water. Some were bright. Others faded and reappeared, uncertain of their own existence. "The drowned stars," Asa said softly. "The ones that fell during the burning of the tree." Corey pressed his palm to the ice again. "They still try to rise. Every reflection here is a question that was never answered." The wave moaned as if in agreement. They began the ascent. The incline was steep, curving upward into mist, and every step sent ripples of light running through the frozen water. Asa carried the ember close to her chest. Its glow created a path where the ice seemed willing to bear their weight. Corey followed, the faint rumble of thunder still living in his lungs. Bryn Jawr climbed behind them, his hands raw from gripping the slick surface, his breath heavy but steady. Iravelle walked last, her bow slung over her shoulder, eyes closed, listening to the strange heartbeat of the world. Halfway up, the air changed. It grew warm, not pleasant warmth, but the fevered heat of decay. The wave beneath them shivered. Voices began to murmur from within the ice, voices layered and hollow, speaking not words but intentions. Asa stumbled, clutching her head as if struck by sudden memory. "The unmaking," Iravelle said, opening her eyes. Her voice trembled for the first time. "It's close." The whispers grew louder. They were not cruel. They were almost kind, like a lullaby meant to undo the listener. "Let go." They breathed through every crack of the ice. Let go, become simple. Asa felt the invitation reach into her mind, gentle, persuasive. The unmaking was not destruction. It was the promise of rest, of no longer needing to remember. The thought was dizzying. "Don't listen," Corey said hoarsely, his hand pressed against his chest where the bottle of thunder had once hung. "It wants us to dissolve." Bryn Jawr snarled, forcing himself upward. "We've been broken enough." He drove his hand into the ice, using the pain to anchor himself. Still, the whisper persisted, soft as breath. "You carry too much. Lay it down. The world will heal without you." Iravelle sank to one knee. The snow around her began to melt in a small circle. "It's offering mercy," she said weakly. "That's how it works," unraveling by compassion. Asa's fingers trembled. The ember dimmed. The warmth she had carried since finding it in the god's ribs flickered uncertainly, as if tempted to believe the voice. For an instant, she imagined setting it down, letting it melt into wave, feeding the unmaking until nothing hurt anymore. Then she saw the drowned stars below, flickering like eyes that refused to close. She remembered their slow motion, their defiance against sinking. She understood. They were not waiting for rescue. They were watching, waiting to see if someone above would remember the sky for them. "No," she said aloud. The word echoed through the wave, cracking the surface near her feet. "No," she repeated louder. "We will not become simple. The world is already simple when it forgets. We are here to remember." The ember flared, blinding for a heartbeat. The heat that spilled from it was not fire but recognition. Corey straightened, gasping as thunder rolled faintly through his bones. Bryn Jawr rose with a roar that shook snow loose from a frozen crest above. Iravelle lifted her face to the air and began to hum. Not words, not song, but pure tone, harmonizing with the trembling of the wave. The unmaking's voice faltered. Its whisper stretched into silence, uncertain of its own shape. The drowned stars beneath them brightened, their light piercing upward like roots seeking air. The wave trembled violently. Cracks spidered outward, releasing bursts of light instead of water. The air turned golden and sharp. "Keep moving," Asa shouted. They climbed faster, the ice shifting under them, collapsing and reforming in flashes of brilliance. Each step shattered another whisper. Each breath remade a piece of sky. At the crest, the world opened. They emerged onto the lip of the frozen wave, where the horizon spread like a wound of light. Behind them, the sea of glass glowed from within, each drowned star lifting slowly, spiraling toward the clouds until the heavens began to repopulate with points of gold. Corey fell to his knees, laughing through exhaustion. They're rising. They remember. Asa looked back down the path they'd taken. The unmaking had gone quiet, but she could still feel its presence, patient, waiting beneath everything, offering simplicity as a kindness. She pitied it, but she would not yield. Irovel stood beside her, wind twisting her silver hair. "You told it no," she said. "Few have ever done that." "It wasn't me," Asa answered. "It was the ember. It remembers more than I do." Brinjar approached, his steps heavy but firm. "Then it taught us how to refuse oblivion." Below them, the sea glittered as the stars found their way back to the night. Each one shone with quiet gratitude, reflected 1,000-fold in the curved mirror of the suspended wave. The light climbed until it reached the edge of dawn. For a moment, all sound ceased. Then, faint and impossible, the world inhaled. The horizon flushed with color. The first true sunrise since memory began. The air, newly born, carried no whisper of surrender. It carried motion, breath, and the steady pulse of everything that had chosen to continue. They stood together, for small figures on the spine of a frozen sea, watching light learn to walk again. Beneath them, the drowned stars danced like coins returning to the open hand of the sky. And though the unmaking still lingered in the deep, whispering softly to the dark, the world no longer listened. It had remembered how to rise. The hall stood in ruin at the end of the world, its doors leaning like exhausted sentinels. Frost crept along the walls in thin veins, mapping the silence. What had once been a place of feasting was now a cathedral for ghosts. The air shimmered faintly, not from heat but from presence, the kind that pressed against the skin and remembered you before you remembered yourself. Asa and her companions entered slowly. Their footsteps echoed longer than they should have, as though the sound wanted to stay behind. The ember in Asa's palm dimmed. It disliked this place. Corey felt the same, the faint rumble of thunder within his chest stilled, uncertain. "This is the dead hall," Irovel murmured, "where those who have forgotten their names linger. To pass through, one must pay the toll." Brinjar's voice was low. "And the toll?" She looked toward the far end of the hall, where shadow wavered like smoke. Memory. At first, they saw nothing but empty benches and shattered flagons. Then the air began to fill with shapes, faint outlines of figures seated where no bodies remained. Pale hands reached through the dim, and whispers brushed their ears. Each voice carried warmth, familiarity, comfort that did not belong to them. "They remember for you," Irovel said softly, "and they hunger for what they cannot recall." A figure rose from one of the benches, tall and cloaked in dusk. Its face was an unlit lantern. Its eyes, reflections of whatever one wished to forget. "Travelers," it said, voice smooth and sorrowful, "the bridge beyond this hall is sealed to the unburdened. Offer your memories, and you may pass lighter." The air thickened. All around, spirits leaned closer, eager as beggars before a feast. Each carried a vessel, cups, shells, stones, bones, waiting to hold what mortals gave up. Corey stepped forward first. He could feel their breath, cold, sweet, intoxicating. They whispered to him, "You carry thunder's echo. But what do you remember of yourself?" He hesitated. Behind the sound of ghosts, he heard something smaller, gentler. A boy laughing in summer rain, chasing sheep across a hill. His mother's voice calling him home. The scent of iron and earth after storm. Childhood, untouched by war, by loss, by divine ruin. He clutched it close, knowing what they asked for. "If I give this," he said, "will it end the pain?" The spirit inclined its head. It will end the wait. Corey turned to Asa. Her gaze was steady, though her knuckles were white around the ember. We need passage, she said, but only if you choose it freely. He breathed once, long and low. Then he touched his fingers to his temple, drew forth a wisp of golden mist, and set it into the vessel the spirit offered. The hall shuddered. The boy's laughter faded from his mind like smoke and rain. When it was done, Corey looked unchanged, but something in his eyes had gone quiet. I can't remember the sound of her voice, he said softly, but the ache remains. Maybe that's enough. The spirits withdrew slightly, satisfied. The path ahead brightened faintly, revealing a bridge woven from mist. Then the figure turned to Asa. And you, flame-bearer, what will you trade? She raised her chin. Nothing. The hall seemed to draw a breath. Every spirit in it leaned forward. The air grew sharp brittle. No one leaves unchanged, the voice insisted. You must surrender something. A sorrow, a promise, a name. Asa stepped closer. I have one thing that cannot be bought. My oath. I swore to guard this ember, to carry it until the world remembers light. You cannot have that. The shadows wavered. Then give something else. A memory of joy. Perhaps the first person you loved. The first time you saw dawn. Her hand tightened around the ember. If I forget those, what will the ember know the world is meant to save? It feeds on remembrance. To sell memory is to starve it. A murmur swept through the hall. Confusion, then anger. Some spirits reached toward her, desperate. We are made of forgetting, they cried. We hunger for what you hoard. The ember flared, sudden and fierce. Its light struck the walls, revealing carvings long hidden beneath frost. Faces of the dead, carved not in reverence but in longing. Their expressions softened under the glow, as if the memory of warmth still lived in the stone. Asa spoke, her voice carrying not command but compassion. You've mistaken forgetting for peace. What you crave is to be remembered. I will carry you with me. All of you, that is my payment. The hall fell silent. Slowly, the spirits knelt. The one who had spoken lowered its head, and its voice trembled. Then take our blessing, keep our memory. May your burden be heavy enough to matter. The bridge of mist solidified into light. Corey stepped forward first, then Brynjar and Iravel. As Asa crossed last, she looked back. The hall behind them was no longer dead. The figures seated once more at their tables raised cups of shadow toward her in a toast that needed no words. When they emerged on the far side, the sky had shifted, clearer, warmer, touched by color. The air carried faint echoes of laughter, not ghostly but human. Corey glanced at her, his eyes calm but distant. I can't remember her name, he said again, meaning his mother. Asa placed a hand on his shoulder. Then I'll remember for you. He smiled faintly. That seems fair. Behind them, the dead hall faded into mist. Its doors closed with a sound like the end of a song. The toll had been paid, not in loss, but in promise. They walked on, carrying the weight of what must never be forgotten. The night after they left the dead hall was windless and long. They camped beneath a ridge of black ice, too tired to speak. The snow hissed as it fell, soft as ash. Even the ember burned low, its glow steady but subdued, as if conserving its heart for something that had not yet begun. It was Corey who first noticed the eyes. Two pale orbs watching from the darkness beyond the firelight. He rose slowly, hand drifting toward his knife. The shape moved forward, low to the ground, silent. Then the fire caught its outline. A wolf, thin to the bone, its fur gray with frost and dust, ribs showing like the frame of a forgotten ship. It did not snarl. It only stood there, breathing softly, head tilted. The smell of cold iron and wildness lingered around it. Brynjar reached for his spear. If it's starving, it'll attack. No, said Iravel. Listen. The wolf's breath came out in mist that formed words, faint and human. Please. Asa stepped closer, her hand still hovering near the ember. The wolf's eyes reflected the light, not like a predator's, but like deep wells catching the stars above. She could feel it, not malice, but hunger shaped by loneliness. What are you? She asked. The wolf bowed its head. What I have always been, it said, the memory of devotion, the echo that follows the sun when she sets. The words shimmered in the air, almost breaking. Corey's skin prickled. You can speak. The wolf blinked slowly, not by choice. The world grows thinner and silence leaks through its seams. I have walked from the edge of the northern ice to find you. Irovel's voice softened. Why us? The wolf turned its gaze to Asa. Because you carry what once fed the roots of the world. And because I have seen her flame, the one who fled the chariot before it fell. Sol's chariot? Bryn-Jar said. The sun itself burned when the sky broke. Nothing survived that. The wolf shook its head, scattering snow from its mane. Not nothing. A daughter still lives beyond the northern ice. She hides where the world bends backward into itself, where the light never fully dies. Asa's pulse quickened. Sol's daughter. The wolf nodded. She keeps the last spark of the sun within her breast. But she is trapped, bound by the shadows that feed on her warmth. Without her, the sky cannot stay lit. The ember you carry must reach her, or dawn will vanish again. The four travelers fell silent. Even the wind seemed to listen. Corey looked at the wolf, his expression torn between awe and disbelief. And what do you want from us? The wolf lowered itself until its belly touched the snow. Let me walk beside you. I have strength enough to smell the path between worlds, and I have waited too long to see morning again. I am gentle, though hunger gnaws me. Feed me only purpose, and I will not bite. Asa felt the ember pulse faintly, like a heartbeat in answer. She glanced at her companions. Irovel's eyes calm but watchful, Corey's uncertain, Bryn-Jar skeptical but softened. She crouched and extended her hand. The wolf hesitated, then pressed its muzzle against her palm. Its fur was coarse and cold, but beneath it she felt life, frail, stubborn, ancient. Then walk with us, she said. But if you lie... If I lie, said the wolf, the stars may claim me. I am bound by their hunger too. It rose, shaking snow from its back, and for the first time since the age of gods, a wolf and a human stood side by side, not as predator and prey, but as pilgrims. They walked north the next morning, the wolf padding silently at their heels. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, they could hear its breath humming low, not growl, not chant, but sound between them, like the memory of sunlight filtered through ice. Corey asked quietly as they climbed the ridge, Do you believe it, what it said about Sol's daughter? Irovel kept her eyes on the horizon. Belief isn't required, only the willingness to follow what still shines. Asa touched the ember, now warm against her chest. If she lives, we'll find her. The seed must meet its light. Bryn-Jar grunted. And if she doesn't, then we'll make one, Asa said. The wolf turned its head, eyes gleaming faintly gold. That is what she would have said. The sky ahead deepened from gray to faint rose. Far off, where the glaciers met the heavens, a narrow band of light glimmered, like a wound refusing to close. They marched toward it. Behind them, their footprints vanished in the snow, but the wind carried their scent, fire, thunder, repentance, and hope, into the endless north, where something unseen stirred awake, listening for the return of sun. They followed the wolf across the ridges of wind-carved ice until mountains rose like teeth from the earth. Their slopes were streaked with veins of dark or that glowed faintly from within, as if the bones of the world still smoldered. At the mouth of a gorge they found a door. Iron and basalt fused together, half buried under centuries of frost. No hand had opened it since the age of forging. Yet when Ace approached, the ember in her chest stirred, and the metal groaned like something waking from a long sleep. The hinges split the silence with a sigh, and a faint red glow seeped from within. Inside stretched the dwarf hold of Brathamar, city of the makers who had once forged stars into weapons and laughter into steel. The halls were vast, lined with black columns veined with copper light. The air smelled of ash and memory. As they entered, the ground trembled beneath their feet. From the depths came a sound, steady, rhythmic, deliberate, the ringing of anvils. Bryn-Jar lifted his torch. But there's no one here. Irovel knelt, touching the floor. No living one, she corrected. They followed the sound through tunnels lit by molten veins that pulsed like arteries. Every few steps, they saw a tool suspended mid-air, hammers rising and falling, tongs shifting, sparks flying from invisible blows. The work continued, even though the smiths were long gone. Corey's voice was hushed. The dwarves forged the foundations of the world. Perhaps their craft outlasted their bodies. Asa watched the floating hammers move with slow grace. Or perhaps the world refuses to forget how to make itself. At the forge's heart, they found the source, a vast anvil of obsidian, its surface covered with runes that glowed like molten script. Above it hovered dozens of spectral figures, translucent as heat mirages, each gripping a hammer that no longer existed. They swung in perfect rhythm, their movements a language of creation. The wolf lowered its head and whispered. They sensed the seed. The ember in Asa's hand brightened, filling the hall with gold. The spectral smiths froze. Their eyeless faces turned toward her, and in unison they spoke, voices overlapping like layers of metal. What is it you would shape? Asa stepped forward. A cradle, she said, something to hold the seed until it blooms. The ghosts exchanged glances of shimmering light. One of them drifted closer, its outline quivering with faint sound. Not armor, not weapon, a cradle. It must breathe, Irovel added softly. It must remember wind and life and song. The spirits murmured to each other, voices like sparks hissing in water. Then the great anvil flared, and the forge erupted into movement. The air grew alive with light. Molten rivulets spilled into carved channels that wound across the floor. From a far corner, the last remnant of a living tree, an ancient root of ashwood, rose from the stone as though pushed up by unseen hands. It was burned at its tips, yet still green at its heart. Asa placed the ember upon the anvil. The fire didn't scorch. It fused. The spirits surrounded it, their hammers rising and falling in soundless cadence. With each strike, the air rippled, forming words too old to be heard by mortal ears. Corey watched, his breath caught in awe. They're not striking metal, he whispered. They're shaping memory. From the ashwood root came threads of smoke that twisted and hollowed themselves, bending into the curve of an instrument, long and slender, glistening like moonlight on water. When the ghost stepped back, a flute lay upon the anvil. It was smooth as river stone, yet faintly warm to the touch. The holes along its length pulsed gently, like a breathing chest. Asa lifted it reverently. It's alive. It must be, said Irovel. The seed will not grow in stillness. It needs breath. The wolf approached, sniffing it. It smells of dawn. Brinjar frowned. Can a flute cradle a seed? Asa smiled faintly. The tree was sung into being once. It can be sung again. She placed the ember within the flute's hollow, though it shivered and a faint tone escaped. A single note, clear and sorrowful, yet full of promise. The ghosts bowed their heads. One stepped forward, its voice soft as cooling metal. When the time comes, breathe into it. The song will remember how the world began. The light of the forge dimmed. The hammer stilled. The spirits faded one by one, until only silence and the soft exhalation of the flute remained. They left the dwarf hold in dawn's pale gleam, the wolf padding quietly beside them. The mountains behind them whispered with cooling stone, as though sighing after long labor. Corey glanced at Asa, who carried the flute against her heart. It breathes, he said. Yes, she answered. And soon, so will the sun. As they descended into the valley of frost, the flute sighed again, a low, living tone that drifted over the snow and made the air tremble with the faint memory of spring. The world narrowed to ice and distance. For days they marched through valleys where wind sculpted the drifts into ridges as tall as towers. The flute at Asa's side breathed softly, each exhale forming threads of light that faded before touching ground. The wolf guided them unerringly, nose to the horizon, where the sky bent low and gray. Then the path ended. Before them spread a frozen river, vast as a plain, its body twisted into impossible coils. It had lost all sense of direction. Great spirals of ice looped back upon themselves. Frozen waves reared and froze mid-collapse. The current was dead, but the memory of motion hummed faintly beneath the glassy surface. Irovel laid her palm to the ice. It's waiting, she said. The river remembers how to move, but it's forgotten where to go. Corey crouched beside her. Can we break it? Asa shook her head. Not with force. The seed must cross water that lives. It needs rhythm, not ruin. She drew the flute from her cloak. Its ashwood surface pulsed gently, as if it sensed the river's confusion. We have to remind it of its song. She lifted the flute to her lips. A low, trembling tone spilled out, then at first, wavering in the cold. The sound drifted across the ice like smoke over mirrors. For a moment, nothing changed. Then faint cracks shivered to the frozen surface, tracing old channels. Corey closed his eyes and began to hum in harmony, voice rough but full of thunder's remnant. The hum grew louder, building into something half chant, half storm. The air thickened. Snow lifted from the ground and swirled upward, forming pale ribbons that danced to their music. The river stirred. Long fractures spread, not as destruction, but as awakening veins. Beneath the ice, black water blinked open like an eye-remembering light. But Corey faltered. His breath broke on the next note. The melody shattered. The current stilled again. He gasped, clutching his throat. It's too vast. I can't hold it. Asa lowered the flute, her face pale. The air fell silent, and in that silence came a whisper, deep and slow, seeping from the cracks in the ice. Leave it. Let it sleep. Even rivers tire of purpose. It was the same voice that had tempted them on the suspended wave, the unmaking, patient as hunger. Corey bowed his head, despair flooding him. Maybe it's right, he said. Maybe we should. A sound cut through his words, low, mournful, and ancient. The wolf lifted its muzzle and howled. The note it made was unlike any howl they had ever heard. It was not a cry of hunger or warning, but of remembering. The tone rippled outward, layering upon itself, echoing from mountain to mountain. The very air thickened with resonance. The howl wove through the river's silence, threading time together. The memory of movement, the moment of stillness, the promise of motion. The river shuddered. The ice fractured in rhythmic waves, each crack a heartbeat, each echo a footstep of water returning to its path. Corey, trembling, found his breath again and joined the howl with song, his cracked voice riding its current. Asa raised the flute once more. She played not to command but to accompany. Short phrases, fragile but true, a melody that curved around the wolf's cry and Corey's chant. Iravelle added her voice, soft and pure, a human echo to nature's call. Together they formed something greater than music, a bridge of remembrance. The frozen river began to move. Ice slabs shifted, lifting like scales. Water surged beneath them, slow at first, then strong. Light swam through it, glowing blue and gold, carrying reflections of lost suns and drowned constellations. The current found direction, north, always north. The unmaking's whisper twisted into a hiss, fading into the cracks it had come from. When the last note faded, the river flowed free, cutting a new path through the valley. Steam rose from its surface, smelling of salt and dawn. Corey sank to his knees, laughing weakly, tears freezing on his cheeks. It listens, he said. It listens. The wolf stood beside him, eyes gleaming like molten silver. Rivers are the veins of time, it said. They only needed a heartbeat. Asa lowered the flute, still warm in her hands. And we gave them one. Iravelle gazed northward, where the water glimmered into distance. Now the path is open. The seed can cross. Brinjar exhaled, the ghost of a smile on his face. And so can we. The fellowship began to walk along the living current. Behind them, the river sang on, its voice carrying the cold like a thread of remembered warmth, while above, clouds parted to reveal a single pale sun peering through, no longer lost, but listening. The valley beyond the river was wide and eerily quiet. Frost hung in curtains from the cliffs, and the snow glittered faintly as if remembering battle. The wind carried no smell of death, no iron tang, no decay, only a stillness too deliberate to be natural. Spears stood upright in the earth, thousands of them, their shafts rimed with ice, their tips turned toward a sky the color of bone. They swayed slightly, not by wind but by memory. Among them lay no bodies, no bones, not even footprints. Only armor, empty yet upright, arranged in ranks that stretched to the horizon. Corey stopped first. "What is this place?" Ira Vel answered quietly, where the last war waited to begin. Bryn Jar touched a helm half buried in frost. It rang faintly, like a bell. "They prepare to fight," he said, but never did. The wolf's ears flattened. "No one dies here. No one moves." Fate paused and never resumed. The gods called this field the Breathless Plain. Asa walked among the spears, her steps careful. The flute at her side gave a faint sigh, and the ember within it dimmed, as though reverent before the stillness. She could feel the weight of what had not happened pressing down on the air, the moment before cry, before blade, stretched into eternity. Everywhere she looked, time seemed half-finished. A gauntlet raised and never lowered, a standard unfurled but never claimed. They were meant to fight for the dawn, Ira Vel murmured, but dawn never came. So they waited, and waiting turned to silence. Asa stopped before a fallen banner. Its fabric had petrified into glass. In its reflection, she saw herself, small, weary, bearing the seed that pulsed faintly through the flute's hollow. She knelt. The ice beneath her hand was smooth, almost warm. Beneath it, faint lights shimmered, not souls, not stars, but the echo of what could have been. "This is what waiting becomes," she said softly. "A graveyard without death." Corey crouched beside her. Maybe they still wait for the signal to rise. Maybe the world holds its breath because we haven't given it reason to exhale. Asa's gaze lingered on the armor, standing like empty men. Maybe it's asking to be allowed to rest. She laid the flute gently on the snow. The ember glowed faintly within, its warmth spreading to the frost in concentric rings. She could feel it yearning, a pull downward toward stillness, toward surrender. "Perhaps this is where it should end," she whispered. "The tree fell here, in a way. The war that never happened. The peace that never came. The seed could sleep among them until the world is ready again." The wolf stepped closer, its breath curling in the air. "Would you bury it where even purpose has stopped breathing?" Her hand trembled. "I'm so tired," she said. "Every mile we walk, the ember grows heavier. It was meant for gods to bear, not for what's left of me." The wolf's eyes reflected her face, doubled in their depths, one version holding light, the other hollow. "If you lay it down now, dawn will forget it ever existed. Is that rest or erasure?" The word struck deep. She closed her eyes. Around her, the air shimmered and faint voices rose, whispers of armor speaking to one another, sighs of shields leaning into their spears. "Join us," they seemed to say. "Sleep a while. Nothing hurts here." Corey reached for her shoulder. His voice was low but firm. "Asa, you taught rivers to move. Don't let silence teach you to stop." She looked up, tears frozen on her lashes. The ember's light flickered violently, pulsing as if uncertain. Ira Vel drew an arrow from her quiver and set upright in the snow beside the flute. "Even waiting has purpose," she said. "The moment before dawn is not absence, it's preparation. The seed deserves to see what it has been carried for." Bryn Jar stepped forward and lifted one of the spears. Frost cracked off its shaft like old scales. "Then let's give it reason to rise." Asa picked up the flute again. Its wood was warm, almost breathing. The ember steadied. She felt its pulse align with hers, slow, exhausted, but unwilling to fade. "Not here," she said. "Not yet." The wolf nodded once. "Good." The sun still listened for courage. As they left the plain, the armor shifted behind them. A ripple moved through the ranks, faint but real, as if the waiting soldiers had exhaled. Spears quivered, and a single tone rang through the frost. Not battle, not mourning, but acknowledgement. Asa looked back once. "Rest," she whispered. "We'll finish what you began." The wind rose, carrying the sound of the spears rustling like wheat in a harvest of ghosts. The light from the embers stretched across the field, glinting on every blade until the entire plain gleamed like a silent sunrise. They walked on, and with each step, the seed's glow grew stronger, not heavy now, but resolved. It had almost been laid to rest. Almost. The road to hell was a descent not of distance, but of silence. The air grew still, colors drained from the world, and the faint light of Asa's ember cast no shadow. The wolf led them along a narrow valley, where frost formed patterns like handwriting across the cliffs. Then the ground leveled, the air thickened, and they stood before a gate of silver mist that opened without sound. Hell's realm was not dark. It was precise. Every rock, every echo, every falling flake of snow seemed arranged with impossible order. Trees grew in even rows. The streams ran perfectly straight, their surfaces flat as mirrors. Nothing decayed. Nothing changed. It was beautiful the way a finished thought is beautiful, flawless and lifeless. Hell waited in the center of her garden. She was not monstrous. Her face was pale, her hair black as ink, and her eyes the color of sleep seen from within. The hem of her gown trailed into mist, blurring where flesh became concept. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm of something that had never once been hurried. "You've come far," she said. "Few living do." Asa bowed slightly. "We seek passage north." Hell smiled faintly. "You carry it with you, the reason the world still breathes." Her gaze drifted to the flute and the ember glowing within. The seed. The air around them grew heavy, as if listening. Corey took a step forward. "You know of it?" "I know what everything tries to become," Hell said. "Order, stillness, completion. The seed is the last refusal of that." She raised one hand, and from the soil a flower grew instantly, a perfect bloom of ice, symmetrical to the last vein. The unmaking came before me and whispered its creed. It said, "Not death, tidiness." Asa frowned. "Tidiness." Hell nodded. "It doesn't kill. It cleans. It erases not from malice, but from appetite, the hunger to file the world blank, to smooth every wrinkle of memory, to make creation behave. It calls that peace." Iravel whispered, "That is worse than death." "Death," Hell said gently, "is a continuation of story. The unmaking wishes to end punctuation itself." The hall around them seemed to contract. The wolf pressed closer to Asa's leg. "It's for bristling. You fought it before?" Bryn Jar asked. "I exist beside it," Hell said. "Where it erases, I preserve. But preservation requires caretakers, and I tire of keeping balance alone. So I offer you this, Ace of the Seed." She stepped closer, and the frost did not crunch beneath her feet. It rearranged itself, clearing a perfect circle around her. "You may give the seed to me," she said. "Here it will not be harmed. My halls are constant. No decay, no hunger, no fear. The world above will fade, but what remains will be remembered, precise, eternal. A museum of what once was." Asa's heart tightened. The thought of rest, of ending the long road, pressed against her like warm sleep. Around her, even her companion seemed slowed. Corey's breath quiet, Iravel's eyes unfocused, Bryn Jar's hand loosening on his sword. Hell's gaze softened. "Or," she continued, "you may take it north and let it grow. Growth is chaos, Asa. It will not be tidy. You will lose control of what you save. Life will forget to be grateful. And you will not live to see the sunrise you carry." The words were kind. Too kind. They slid through Asa like lullabies. "Why, give me a choice?" she asked quietly. Hell tilted her head. "Because I am not the unmaking. I offer endings that mean something." Asa looked at her companions. The wolf's eyes glowed faintly. It could not speak here, but its gaze was pleading. Corey's jaw clenched, his knuckles white. Iravel mouthed soundless words, a prayer or a warning. Only Bryn Jar found voice. If we give it to her, the world stops singing. Hell turned to him. "Would that be so terrible?" Asa felt the flute warm in her hand. It was pulsing like breath. She realized the seed was listening, waiting for her will to align. The offer shimmered before her. Perfection, serenity, rest. Then, faintly, she heard something. Not Hell's voice, not her companion's, but the smallest sound. A trickle of water somewhere distant. A river she and Corey had once sung back to life. It was imperfect, clumsy, off-key, and it was alive. She smiled. "Tidiness," she said softly, "has never been my god." Hell's expression did not change, but the air trembled. "So you choose noise." "I choose breath," Asa said. I choose motion. Hel sighed, not angry, but wistful. Then go, and quickly. The unmaking grows patient again. It will not ask next time. She reached out, and with a single touch of her finger, the frost parted to form a road of black glass leading deeper north. When the light returns, she said, I will not see it. But remember, death is not your enemy. Forgetting is. The road shimmered. The fellowship stepped forward. As they crossed from Hel's domain back into mortal cold, the goddess's garden reassembled itself. Petals falling into precise order, snowflakes aligning midair like obedient stars. When Asa looked back, Hel was gone. Only her voice lingered in the wind, calm and distant. Carry your chaos well, little bearer. It is the only thing stronger than perfection. And with that blessing, half warning, half farewell, they walked once more toward the edge of the world, where even the unmaking could not yet tell if dawn or dusk would come next. They found Hrefna at the edge of the world. She was waiting by a lake, so still it seemed carved from glass, her figure wrapped in a cloak of raven feathers. Her hair had the sheen of winter dusk, her eyes the tired kindness of one who has waited far too long to be believed. She did not speak as they approached. She only looked at them and at the flute Asa carried. Then the ground beneath them shifted. A sound like which straining against stone filled the air, deep and patient. Older than language. From within Hrefna's chest, light began to seep. Green and gold, the color of sap in sunrise filtered through leaves. When she finally opened her mouth, her voice was not her own. I am what remains of the first tree. The air trembled with each word. Frost melted at her feet, not into water but into small blades of grass, each one trembling with newborn fear. The roots still dream beneath the world's skin, she said, and through this one's breath I speak. You have carried my heart far enough to find its echo. Asa stepped closer, the flute warm in her hands. You are Yggdrasil? A shard, Hrefna replied. The trunk burned, the branches scattered, but memory lingers in fragments that refuse to forget. You carry one such fragment, the seed. The lake mirrored their faces, distorted by ripples that came from no wind. Beneath the water, faint shapes glowed, root-like veins, pulsing with light. We've carried it across storms, silence, even Death's Gate, Asa said. Tell us how to make it live again. Hrefna's eyes rolled back, and the green within her brightened until her voice became a chorus, multiple and layered, the sound of forests speaking through her. To sprout, said the tree, the seed requires two gifts mortals rarely offer, a remembered morning and a forgiven enemy. Silence fell, dense and fragile. Irovel frowned. What does that mean? The voice through Hrefna sighed. The seed is made of memory and mercy. To recall dawn is to recall why light mattered. To forgive the hand that unmade it is to allow life to risk itself again. Brynjar clenched his fists. We've seen nothing but ruin. Where we find such things. Hrefna, Yggdrasil, looked at him, and her voice softened. They are not found. They are made. Asa's breath caught. A remembered morning. A forgiven enemy. Two halves of the same act. Remembrance without bitterness. Corey took a step forward. The river that sang again. The stars we freed. Were those not enough? The world remembers through you, said the tree. But the seed must remember through itself. You must give the story of morning and the grace that follows night. The wolf lowered its head, speaking in thought rather than voice. Then the burden is hers, it said, looking at Asa. She carries the ember's memory. She must name the day the world began for her, and forgive the one who took it. Asa's throat tightened. She thought of her village, swallowed by frost and fire, of her sister, lost in the chaos when gods fell, of the man who led that raid, a Jarl whose ambition had burned her life away. He is dead, she whispered. Hrefna's gaze deepened. Then forgive him still. The dead do not need it, but the living do. The air quivered. The lake began to thaw, its surface splitting into veins of moving light. Asa closed her eyes. She saw her childhood home, the smoke curling from its chimney, the field of barley shimmering in early sun. The morning before the world broke. The smell of bread, her sister's laugh. She let the image fill her, ache and all, until she could almost feel warmth again. And then she thought of the man who had taken it from her, his sword flashing, his face hard and human, not monstrous, just afraid, desperate to survive in a world unraveling. She saw him fall, trampled in the same war that had stolen everything from both of them. "I forgive you," she said into the stillness. "Not because you deserve it, but because the seed must grow." The flute in her hands pulsed, the ember inside flaring gold-white. The sound that followed was not music, but wind remembered, the hush between branches before a dawn chorus begins. Hrefna gasped. Her human voice returned, breath trembling. "It hears you," she said. The seed stirs. Roots of light erupted beneath the lake, spiraling outward in patterns of renewal. The air smelled of soil, rain, and beginnings. "The morning is remembered," said the voice fading from her. "The enemy is forgiven. The seed knows what to become." Hrefna collapsed to her knees, exhausted but smiling faintly. Asa cradled the flute. Its ashwood shimmered, veins of light crawling beneath its surface like slow lightning. It inhaled once, gently, and released a tone that stretched across the valley, clear and endless. Corey fell silent, hand on his chest. "It breathes." Iravel nodded, tears bright on her cheeks. "The world will follow." The wolf raised its muzzle and howled, not mournfully, but in greeting. The sound rose to the heavens and came back as color, streaks of rose and gold threading the northern sky. For the first time since Ragnarok, light rose not from above, but from within the earth itself. Asa turned to Hrefna, who still knelt, pale and spent. "Will you live?" "I am part of the tree," Hrefna whispered. "So long as it remembers, so will I. Go now, north, where dawn waits to be born. The seed is ready to sprout, but it needs one last thing." "What thing?" Hrefna smiled weakly, her eyes full of reflected sunrise. "For someone to stay behind and sing it into life." The wind fell silent again. The companions looked to Asa. She knew then what the tree had always known, that every sunrise is bought by someone who never gets to see it. She held the flute close, feeling its breath mingle with hers, and whispered to the ember inside, "Not yet, but soon." Then she rose, her companions at her side, and they continued north, toward the place where light was waiting to be remembered. The north had no end. After Hrefna's revelation, they journeyed through plains where air turned to glass, and every footstep left a note that echoed too long. The stars above grew larger each night, pale and close, as if watching. The wind blew backward, and frost drifted upward like slow smoke. They had reached the edge of direction itself, where sky and sea were one substance, brittle and luminous. There, half buried in a glacier, lay a colossal curve of bone, smooth as marble and veined with silver. It arched across the horizon like a bridge built by a forgotten god. "The bones of Jormungandr," Iravel whispered. "The serpent that once encircled the world." The wolf lowered its head. He died trying to bite his own tail again, to make the world whole. But death left him uncoiled, and the sky fell into the space where his body had been. Asa ran her fingers along the ivory. The bone hummed faintly, like a harp string beneath a distant hand. "We can't cross it by foot." "Then we sail," Corey said quietly, eyes tracing the curve as it vanished into mist. They built their vessel from ice and memory. The dwarf-forged flute breathed warmth into frozen planks. Each exhale softened the frost, shaping it into hull and sail. When it was done, the craft shimmered translucent as breath. Brynjar cut loose the moorings, and they stepped aboard. As soon as Asa played a single note, the ship lifted from the ground. The bones of Jormungandr vibrated beneath them, and the air thickened into motion. The vessel rose, gliding along the serpent arch as though sailing a frozen sky. Beneath them stretched the broken world. Rivers of light, mountains folded like discarded wings, and the ghosts of the sea glittering in pieces. For a time no one spoke. The wind made its own language, threading between the ribs of the ancient serpent. Corey steered by instinct, following the faint shimmer of dawn ahead. Iravel stood at the bow, eyes closed, listening to the air's shifting tones. Brynjar stood apart. His gaze was fixed on the void below, where a fragment of armor drifted like ash in slow water. He had been quieter since the breathless plain, his shoulders heavier, his silence deliberate. The wolf watched him. "You hear it too," it said softly. He nodded without looking. "Yes, the voices that ask for peace." "They are echoes," Irovel said, "not commands." Bryn Jar's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but their silence feels familiar." Asa lowered the flute. "What do you mean?" He turned toward her, eyes dull as tarnished metal. "Hrefna said the seed needs forgiveness. I thought I'd forgiven my enemies, the men who burned the temple, the warlords who followed me, the gods who abandoned us." His voice broke. "But she didn't mean them. She meant me." The ship drifted slower, as though the air itself leaned in to listen. "I led them," he continued. "I was the one who ordered the fires. I told them the world could be remade through ruin. Even when I saw the Dawnstone fall, I kept shouting for glory. Every death since began in my mouth." No one answered. The flute's warmth dimmed, and frost crept across the deck. Bryn Jar gripped the railing until it cracked beneath his hand. "You carry a god's heart, Asa. I carry the ash of everything that heart lost. How do you forgive that?" Asa looked at him for a long moment. "Not by forgetting." He laughed, harsh and low. "Then I'll never earn it." The wolf padded closer, its breath steaming in the cold air. "Forgiveness isn't earned," it said. "It's the act of remembering yourself kindly enough to move again." Corey turned from the helm. "You're the reason we're still alive. Every mile of this journey was built on your strength." "That strength killed the world," Bryn Jar said. "No," Asa said softly. "It survived it. That's what the seed needs to understand. Creation born from what broke." Bryn Jar sank to his knees. His hands shook. The ship dipped lower, as if his weight pulled at the sky itself. He whispered something, too quiet to hear, and the air around him shimmered. Images bled from the bone beneath the ship. Men with torches, a burning gate, his own reflection in the flames. Then, slowly, the vision shifted. The same hands rebuilding, the same face older, weary, gentler. He pressed his palms together. "Then I forgive you," he said to his own ghost. For believing destruction was devotion. The serpent's bones rang. The note carried through the air like a bell too large to imagine. The ship rose again, lifted by unseen current. The frost that had crept across the deck evaporated in threads of light. Irovel opened her eyes, whispering, "He did it." The wolf tilted its head toward the horizon. "One forgiveness remains," it said. "The seed has both its mourning and its mercy." Asa placed a hand on Bryn Jar's shoulder. The ember glowed brighter within the flute, its breath deepening, alive and ready. Below them, the bones of Jormungandr began to shine. Along his spine, ancient runes flickered awake, casting columns of light into the clouds. Each symbol pulsed once, twice, then stilled, like a heartbeat rejoining the rhythm of the world. Corey smiled through his tears. He forgave himself, and the serpent forgave the sky. They sailed on, carried by music older than sound. Far ahead, the horizon split. A narrow band of color, gold and rose, fragile but real, bled into the endless gray. The first promise of true dawn. Bryn Jar stood, shoulders lighter than they had ever been. "So this is what forgiveness sounds like," he said, quietly. Asa raised the flute to her lips. "Yes," she said, "and now we teach the sun to hear it." And as the melody rose from Jormungandr's shining bones, the frozen sky began to move, thawing into a sea of light. They followed the thaw until the world thinned. The air turned glassy, filled with drifting motes of light that did not fall but hovered, like undecided snowflakes, each carrying a memory of warmth it feared to release. The sky had forgotten how to choose between night and day. Its colors hung suspended, bruised gold and pale blue, like breath trapped inside crystal. At the horizon stood a wall of frost, so vast it curved the earth, veined with slow-moving light. The wolf halted before it, ears low, and spoke softly. "Beyond this veil hides what remains of the sun." No one moved. Even the wind, faithful companion of their journey, fell silent, unsure whether to push or bow. Irovel approached first, her hand brushing the surface. The frost was not cold. It pulsed faintly, warm and anxious, like the skin of a living thing holding its breath. It's afraid, she said. The ice is made of her hesitation. Asa stepped forward. The flute held close. Within it, the sea glowed, waiting. Then we must ask her to trust us. Bryn Jawr frowned. And if she won't, then the dawn never learns it can rise imperfect. Asa said. She pressed her palm to the veil. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the frost parted like mist touched by sound. A corridor of light opened, spiraling inward. They entered carefully, the wolf leading. The air shimmered with the scent of burnt honey and rain, an impossible memory of summer. At the corridor's end stood a figure curled upon herself, radiant and trembling. She was small, smaller than legend had promised. A young woman wrapped in wings of molten frost, hair scattering gold dust as she moved. Around her, light pooled uncertainly, never quite escaping her reach. Sol's daughter. When she looked up, the brilliance of her eyes was unbearable, not blazing, but fragile, the glow of something terrified to exist. You came, she said, her voice the sound of sunlight breaking through clouds. But you shouldn't have. Asa knelt before her. The world is waiting for you. The girl shook her head. The world is cruel to light. It wants me perfect, burning, endless, blameless. I am not my mother. I am not a sun that knows how to stay steady. I flicker. I waver. If I rise, they will expect order again. I can give only warmth that changes. Corey took a hesitant step forward. The world has learned to live with change. Has it? Her voice cracked. It destroyed itself trying to hold perfection still. What if I fail them? What if I rise and fall, and the world breaks each time? The wolf moved closer, its tone a low hum. Falling and rising are the same motion. Child, the difference is courage. She turned to it, tears crystallizing midair. I was born at the end of everything. I don't know how to begin. Asa touched the flute to her lips. Then let us teach you the song that remembers how. She played softly. The melody was imperfect, notes bending, air trembling, rhythm faltering, but true. It carried laughter and storm, forgiveness and grief. The seed inside the flute glowed in response, sending threads of light outward. They wound gently around the girl's hands, her throat, her heart. This isn't command, Asa said between breaths. It's invitation. You don't have to be perfect. You only have to rise once, and the world will learn from your effort. Sol's daughter closed her eyes. Her wings unfurled slowly, shedding frost that fell as glowing ash. Beneath her feet, the ice began to melt into radiant mist. The light she carried no longer burned, it breathed. I can try, she whispered, but only if someone stays to guide me. Asa met her gaze. Then we'll stay until the first dawn finds its balance. Bryn Jawr knelt, bowing his head. You owe us nothing. The world owes you gentleness. The girl smiled faintly. It owes me nothing, either. But perhaps it can begin again without debt. The air around them brightened, not suddenly but with patient courage. The veil dissolved into thousands of shining fragments, each one rising like birds freed from glass. The light spread across the sky in hesitant streaks, first uncertain, then joyous. Sol's daughter lifted her hands, trembling. It's happening, she said, but it feels fragile, like it could stop at any breath. That's how all life feels, Asa said softly. That's how it knows it's real. The girl reached toward her. What is this warmth? The world remembering it deserves another morning, Asa answered. The wolf began to howl, and Corey's voice joined, deep and cracked with wonder. Iravelle added her song, clear, high, trembling like a reed in wind. The music wove through the light, coaxing it higher, steadier. Sol's daughter lifted her face to the sky. Tears turned to fire in their fall. I will rise, she said, not flawless, not eternal, but alive. The horizon opened. The first dawn since the world's undoing spilled across the plains, gold spilling into blue. Shadows stretching long like memories making peace with their light. They all stood silent, bathed in warmth too new to name. Corey whispered, the sun is learning. Asa smiled through her tears. So are we. And above them, the young sun trembled, then steadied, her light imperfect, human, and utterly enough. The dawn had barely learned to breathe when the horizon broke again. Light trembled, dimmed, and then something vast crossed through it, blotting color from the air. The unmaking had returned, but it no longer appeared as a formless whisper or a murmur beneath ice. It arrived wearing everyone they had failed. Asa saw her sister first, standing barefoot upon the thawing snow. Her eyes were the same gray as the morning that had taken her life. Then behind her came others. Corey's mother, the soldiers from the breathless plain, the drowned stars in human shape, even the god whose ribs had once sheltered the ember. All moved as one, their voices joined in gentle unison. "We are what you left behind," they said. "We are what hurts. You have carried us long enough. Let go and you may rest." Their tone was not cruel. It was kindness sharpened to the edge of extinction. The air folded inward. Around them, the new sun faltered, her light paling. Even Sol's daughter, radiant moment before, trembled as if her warmth were being weighed and found unnecessary. Asa felt the pull, not destruction, but relief, as if gravity itself had promised mercy. The figures smiled softly, their faces calm, unmarred by time or guilt. Peace without memory, they whispered. A world blank, clean, finished. Brinjar took a half-step forward before catching himself, tears streaking the frost on his beard. "She looks like my wife," he murmured. "She never even blamed me." Iravel clutched her bows so tightly that blood rose where her nails bit the skin. "They're beautiful," she said. "Too beautiful, like silence pretending to be song." The wolf growled, low and desperate. "Don't listen. That piece devours its own echo." But Corey was already sinking to his knees. His mother's voice, her real voice, called to him, "Come home, child." No thunder left to carry, no storms to mend. He sobbed, "I've done enough harm trying to save what keeps breaking." Asa stepped forward, her heart cracking under the weight of so many familiar faces. The unmaking's warmth was unbearable. It promised freedom from everything she had ever feared to forget. The figures turned toward her as one. "You, flame-bearer," they said, "you've held the last spark long enough. Give it to us. We'll keep it safe, perfectly still. The world will sleep forever, untroubled." Asa looked at them, their serenity, their flawlessness, their emptiness, and understood. "Stillness," she whispered. "That's what you want. A world with no ache, no mess, no hunger. A world too perfect to remember why it ever mattered." The unmaking smiled through 1,000 borrowed faces. "Pain is the price of disorder. You've seen what your chaos breeds. Let us tidy what remains." Asa raised a flute. The ember within glowed, not bright, but alive, pulsing like the faint breath of something stubborn. "You call it tidiness," she said, "but what you mean is erasure. You'd trade love for symmetry, grief for silence. That isn't peace. That's anesthesia." The faces flickered, uncertain. The living always romanticize pain. She shook her head. "Not pain. Scars. Proof that we tried." The air vibrated. Around them, the frozen plain began to blur between light and shadow. Sol's daughter cried out, the edges of her light unraveling. "If they take me," she gasped, "the dawn forgets itself." Asa stepped between her and the unmaking. "Then let me offer a bargain." The multitude stilled. "Keep your peace," Asa said, her voice trembling but steady. "But leave us memory. Leave us the space to falter and heal, to bear marks of what was lost. A world with room for scars, because only the wounded remember why life is worth mending." The air rippled. The unmaking's chorus hesitated, as though caught between desire and confusion. "Imperfection breeds sorrow," it murmured. "Sorrow breeds song," Asa countered. "And song keeps you from swallowing the world whole." The figures' calm faces began to fracture, not breaking, but shifting, uncertain. The serenity faltered into expression, grief, yearning, even laughter. Brinjar's wife blinked as if waking from a dream. "You remember me," she whispered. "Always," he said, voice shaking. "Even when it hurts." The light of the new sun wavered, then steadied, golden veins threading the sky. Sol's daughter lifted her arms, her radiance pushing gently against the tide of the unmaking's glow. You can't erase what has been sung, Corey said suddenly, rising to his feet. His cracked voice carried thunder again. We've taught the air to remember. The wolf howled, a sound of defiance that split the mist. The unmaking shrank. The borrowed faces dimmed, their edges scattering into dust and wind. As they faded, they whispered, not hateful, but wistful, "You could have rested." Asa lowered the flute. "One day we will, but not today." The last remnants dissolved into light, drawn into the rising sun. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft breathing of the world relearning how to exist. Irovel touched the ground. "It's over." Asa looked at the flute in her hands, the seed within now radiant as dawn through leaves. "No," she said softly. "It's begun." Overhead, the sky unfolded, not flawless, not unscarred, but magnificent in its uneven light. The new sun trembled, golden and human, in her imperfection. And across that fragile, newly remembered morning, the world exhaled. The raft hung motionless in midair, a fragile silhouette suspended among drifting shards of light. Around it, the sky glowed with the stillness of a held breath. Not silence, exactly, but a pause between words, between worlds. It was as if creation itself had stopped to consider what came next. They had crossed the veil. They had outlasted the unmaking. Yet now, standing above a remade earth and beneath a newborn sun, they found themselves adrift in stillness. The new light was strange, neither warm nor cold. Its radiance diffused through rings of gold that shimmered like memory. Beneath them stretched the reborn land. Mountains folded like sleeping beasts, rivers pulsing faintly with liquid dawn, forests still learning how to move in wind that had forgotten its own rhythm. It was beautiful, yes, but inert. Waiting. Corey tugged the sail, but it did not stir. The canvas hung limp as a shroud. He frowned, trying again, and the rope in his hands trembled faintly, as if uncertain whether to obey. Irovel whispered a word of wind, a soft incantation carried from her lips to the mast. For a moment, the air shimmered with potential. Then nothing. Even the wolf, usually quiet and patient, pressed its paws to the edge of the raft, growling low at the stillness. Its fur bristled as if sensing that this calm was not peace, but hesitation. "It's not broken," Asa said quietly. She was sitting cross-legged by the central mast, her hands cupped around the ember that still glowed faintly within the small ashwood flute. The light inside it pulsed like a heartbeat, steady but uncertain. "It's afraid," she continued. "The world hesitates, like a door that won't open until we prove we're ready to enter." Her words hung there, soft but vast. Around them, the sky rippled faintly, as if listening. The raft creaked in response, a long, weary sigh from what that remembered too much. Brinjar stood at the stern, his boots planted firmly, his eyes fixed on the shimmering horizon. His reflection swayed faintly in the translucent planks beneath his feet. The light refracted through the surface, splitting him into fragments, one man made of many selves. At his waist, tied with a strip of leather worn smooth from years of touch, hung a small pendant of copper. It caught the sunlight weakly, its once bright metal dulled to the color of old tears. He lifted it, thumb brushing its edges. "My last piece of the old world," he murmured. His voice was steady, but beneath it trembled something ancient and raw. Inside, a lock of hair. "My wife's. The one thing that didn't burn when I did." The others watched him silently. The raft shuddered once, then fell still again. Asa looked up from the ember. "It's holding you still," she said gently. Brinjar gave a hollow laugh. "It's holding me together." "Maybe that's the same thing," Corey said softly. The wolf lifted its head, eyes glowing with silver understanding. Its voice, when it came, was not sound but vibration, a feeling that brushed the inside of their thoughts. "You gave yourself forgiveness," it said, "but not release. You still clutched the wound like a charm." Brinjar's fingers tightened around the pendant until his knuckles whitened. The ship groaned beneath his weight, the air thick with unshed motion. Below them, the clouds shifted, forming dim, ghostly shapes. The breathless plain, the burning temple, the faces of soldiers who never wept. His past lingered below, tethered like an anchor. He looked toward Asa, eyes dark and vulnerable. If I let this go, she'll be gone. Asa met his gaze. No, you'll finally make room for where she went. The words struck him like wind against stone, soft, yet capable of erosion. He looked down at the pendant again. It was so small, so harmless, and yet it weighed as though he carried an entire world in his palm. His reflection flickered in the copper's surface, fractured by tears he hadn't felt coming. Below them, the world itself seemed to lean closer. The clouds swirled faintly, whispering, as if waiting for him to decide. Bryn Jawr took a long breath. Then this is for her. He raised his arm high and brought the pendant down hard against the deck. The copper split with a sharp, ringing sound, bright and pure, a single note that cracked open the stillness. For an instant, everything stopped, even thought. Then the air inhaled. The raft lurched forward. Wind, sudden and wild, rushed into the sails, tearing to the canvas like laughter finally remembered. The ropes hummed, the wood moaned with relief, and the entire vessel tilted upward, cutting to the frozen air. Beneath them, the clouds broke apart. The shards of copper scattered into light, igniting midair. From them rose faint shapes, hands, faces, echoes of laughter. Bryn Jawr's wife's voice wove through the wind, tender and light. She didn't vanish. She changed. Her image dissolved into warmth. Threads of gold weaving through the air, curling around Bryn Jawr's hands, his shoulders, his heart. He fell to his knees, weeping and smiling all at once. "She's not gone," he breathed. "No," Asa said softly. "You just stop keeping her still." The wolf lay down, head between its paws, eyes glinting like twin moons. "And now the world moves again," it murmured. The raft surged forward, cutting through dawn like a ship through calm waters. The wind that filled the sail was not mere weather. It was breath, long withheld. The new sun climbed higher, painting gold across every fraction of wood, every scar on their hands. Its warmth didn't erase what had been. It revealed the beauty of endurance. Iravell leaned against the mast, her hair rippling in the new breeze. She watched the scattered glints of copper dissolve into the distance, vanishing into the horizon. "Loss," she whispered, "isn't emptiness, it's passage." Corey nodded, his voice low, reverent. "A door, not a void." Bryn Jawr looked up toward the light, his face wet with tears that gleamed like molten metal. His hands were empty now, but his chest was light, not hollow, but open. "Then let it open," he said. And it did. The raft rose higher, buoyed by wind that smelled faintly of salt and pine. Around them, the sky unfurled into color, vast blues and deep violets, streaked with living gold. Beneath, the new world shifted, lands glinting with the faint shimmer of awakening. Rivers flexed, seas rolled, mountains sighed. Everywhere they looked, motion returned. Corey's thunder stirred in its vessel, humming low like a heart rediscovering rhythm. Iravell's hands trailed in the air, coaxing gentle gusts that followed the raft's path. The wolf howled once, not in mourning but in triumph, and the sound echoed through the heavens. Asa stood at the bow, holding the flute that carried the ember. Its light reflected on her face, fierce, forgiving. "We are not what survived," she said quietly. "We are what begins." The words seemed to ripple through everything. The light around them flared, bright but kind. The raft cut across it, leaving behind a trail of warmth that lingered long after their passing. They sailed for what might have been hours or days or ages. Time had loosened its grip again, but this time it didn't matter. There was no fear of stillness anymore. Eventually, they came upon the edge of the world, a shimmering curtain of light, vast and trembling, as though the universe itself awaited their touch. Asa looked at her companions, Corey with his thunder, Iravell with her breath, Bryn Jawr with his steady heart, the wolf with its knowing gaze. The four of them stood upon the trembling deck of the raft that had carried them beyond endings and into the possibility of beginnings. The air shimmered around them, alive with expectation. Asa smiled, not the smile of victory, but a surrender, the kind that only exhaustion and wonder can create, when one realizes that survival is not the same as completion. "Together, then?" she asked. They nodded one by one. Corey, silent as ever, loosened the stopper from his glass vessel. The sound was small, a sigh, a pop, yet the effect was vast. The air thickened, then shuddered. From the mouth of the bottle poured not violence, not lightning, but memory. Thunder rolled out softly, deep and resonant, a heartbeat heard through the bones of the world. It did not crash, it breathed. The sound circled them, folding into the rhythm of their own pulses, as if the world was tuning itself to the key of life. Iravelle stepped forward next. Her fingers fluttered at her side like birds learning flight. She whispered, not words, but intention, and the wind leaned forward as though listening to an old friend. A cool gust wound around the mast, curling playfully through her hair, then spilling over the deck. The stagnant air trembled and bent, remembering its purpose. Brinjar placed his hand on the deck, palm flat, fingers splayed wide. His heartbeat passed into the wood, slow and steady, grounding the others. The ship's bones groaned in reply, the ancient timbers waking as if called by name. The faint hum of motion began to echo up through the planks, the whisper of readiness. And Asa, last of the fire-bearers, lifted the ashwood flute. The ember within still glowed, its light delicate yet defiant. She raised it to her lips and breathed into it. The ember flared. Light poured from it, not in blinding radiance, but in graceful ribbons that moved like thought through air. The tendrils of brilliance intertwined with thunder, wind, and the quiet strength of stone. Together they wove a living tapestry of motion, color, and warmth. The raft began to hum. Its edges blurred as if the light within it was learning to move outward. Then it shifted, not forward, not backward, but through. The curtain of light before them parted, slow as dawn, vast as forgiveness. Beneath them, the world unfurled like a page turned by invisible hands. Rivers that had lain motionless began to move, trickling first, then surging. Their waters glowed faintly as if laced with starlight. Trees shivered, shaking off centuries of stillness. Their branches exhaled leaves, green unfurling like rediscovered laughter. The clouds above resumed their eternal drift, painting shifting shadows across a landscape newly awake. And the sky sang, not in language, but in tone, a deep, resonant harmony that thrummed through every living thing. It was the sound of the world remembering its rhythm, the hum of existence finally breathing again. The raft crossed the threshold. Corey felt thunder answer in his chest. A quiet echo, the beat of courage that had not died. Iravelle laughed, wind spilling from her throat, her joy scattering into the air like petals. Brinjar bowed his head, his eyes wet, his heart steady in his chest like a drum, keeping time for creation itself. And Asa, standing at the bow, felt the embers warm spread outward through her body, down her arms, across her chest, not consuming but expanding. For the first time, she understood. The flame was not hers to carry. It was the world's pulse, merely borrowed until it could beat on its own again. As they sailed through the veil, the crew felt the world exhale. It was not just air that moved, but memory, a deep sigh that released everything that had been held too tightly for too long. They looked behind them. In their wake stretched a luminous path, a thin, glowing trail made of what they each had given. Fire, thunder, wind, and heart. It shimmered faintly across the sky, like a bridge between eras, a testament that not all endings are erasures. Ahead, beyond the horizon, something vast waited. It was not an enemy or a god, but potential. A world still unshaped, pliant as dawn. Asa lowered the flute, her hand resting gently on its warm surface. She closed her eyes. "The world has begun again," she murmured. Corey turned to her, wind tousling his hair. His eyes were alight with quiet mischief, and remember how to breathe. Iravelle laughed, soft, pure, and human. It sounded like the rustle of new leaves. Then let's see what it dreams next. Brinjar lifted his face to the light. "Let be kind." The wolf brushed its tail against Asa's leg, and in their minds they felt its thought, clear, unspoken, old as instinct. "It will be. It remembers you." The raft glided onward, no longer a vessel but a living thing, carried by more than air. Around them, the light swelled until sky and sea and sun became one vast, breathing horizon. The sun grew larger as they sailed, not fierce, not punishing, but radiant with belonging. Its warmth didn't burn, it embraced. Light met breath, wind met earth, fire met memory. And in the joining, something new was born, not a perfect world, but a living one. The raft drifted toward the trembling edge of this new dawn. Far below, rivers carved new paths through softened stone. Seeds split, roots reached, clouds mingled with mountain peaks in soft collision. The air itself shimmered with laughter unspoken, as a creation delighted in its own imperfection. Asa turned to her companions. "We've done what we were meant to." Corey nodded, his bottle of thunder now empty, its glass clear as the morning sky. "Then let's not stay too long in yesterday." Iravel smiled, raising her hands to the wind. "The world will keep its own rhythm now." Brinjar looked down at his empty hands, flexed his fingers, and exhaled. "And so will we." The wolf stood, stretching. "Then go." It whispered, "Before the gods remember how to envy you." They laughed. Quiet, tired laughter that rolled into the wind and scattered like ash turned to light. As they passed beyond the final shimmer of the veil, the raft became translucent, its edges dissolving into radiance. They felt weight leave them, not just the pull of gravity, but the last remnants of fear. For a moment, Asa looked back. The path of their passage stretched endlessly behind, a line of light across the heavens, curving gently toward the horizon. It looked almost like a scar, and yet it glowed, a healed wound that refused to forget. And ahead, the light deepened into color, blues, greens, golds, a spectrum of promise. She reached out her hand, feeling the air vibrate around her fingers. It was warm, alive. "The new age," she said softly, "doesn't begin with gods. It begins with breath." Corey smiled, thunder murmuring faintly in his chest, then breathed deeply. Iravel's hair lifted in the wind as she whispered, "And keep listening." Brinjar closed his eyes. "Let it find us again someday, when it needs reminding." Asa nodded. Her smile was weary but bright. "It will." The raft glowed once more, then vanished into the rising light, leaving only the echo of their laughter, a faint, human sound woven into the song of the new world. And the world, at last, remembered motion. It would forget again someday, as all things do. But for now, for this breath, this age, it was alive. They reached the crater at twilight, when the new sun's gold thinned into silver, and the air tasted faintly of rain on stone. The place was vast and silent, a hollow in the world's skin where radiance had once burned so fiercely it melted the very horizon. Now the light slept there, pooled like milk at the bottom of a chalice, pulsing softly as if it dreamed. The crater's rim was etched with roots of crystal, white and translucent, spreading outward like frozen lightning. Each vein glowed with faint warmth. Asa could feel it beneath her boots, the world holding its breath, waiting for the seed's return. "This is where it wants to rest," Iravel said, "where the last light died and the first might wake." Corey nodded. "Then this is where we plant it." They stepped down carefully, the air thick and sweet. Every movement stirred motes of brightness that rose like dust and drifted back into the glow. At the crater's center, a bed of ashwood waited, the remains of flute hollowed by the long journey, its surface veined with gold cracks where the seed's pulse had burned through. Asa knelt, holding the seed in both hands. It no longer felt hot. It beat like a small heart, steady and unafraid. Around her, the others formed a circle. Corey stood opposite her, hands trembling but sure. "We've carried it through storms, gods, and ghosts," he said. "If it fails now, let it fail knowing we believed." The wolf lowered its head beside him, eyes closed. "Belief is the only soil left," it murmured. "Pray through me." Hrefna, still pale from the voice of Yggdrasil, touched the flute's broken edge. Her breath was shallow, but when she exhaled, the air around her rippled, fragrant with sap and morning. "The tree remembers," she whispered. "It's ready." Asa placed the seed inside the flute's hollow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crater brightened, soft and slow, light not spilling outward but inward, folding into itself, seeking shape. Corey began to sing. His voice was rough, cracked by frost and grief, but the melody carried. It was a tune he had hummed when they sang the river wake, the same rhythm that had once coaxed thunder from silence. He sang of imperfection, of broken worlds still daring to bloom. The wolf's low howl joined him, rising and falling, its cadence ancient and steady. The two sounds intertwined, voice and wilderness, man and echo, and the air thickened with motion. Hrefna breathed deeply, sinking her lungs with the wind itself. Each exhale turned the light warmer. Each inhale drew it deeper into the ashwood grain. Leaves of radiance flickered along the flute sides, unfolding like wings. The seed pulsed once, twice, then cracked, not as a wound but as an opening. From a fracture spilled roots of light that reached into the soil, twining with the crystal veins beneath. Asa fell back, shielding her eyes. The ground trembled, but gently, a heartbeat magnified through stone. The crater filled with the sound of growth, with stretching, light threading, breath becoming matter. Corey's song broke, replaced by laughter that came out as a sob. "It's alive," he said. The wolf's tail swept the dust, glowing faintly, alive enough to choose its shape. Hrefna's eyes rolled white. Her voice deepened with the resonance of the tree. "It will not rise as one trunk," she said, "but as many. Branches will find their own roots. Roots will find their own skies. The world will remember by becoming diverse again." The light climbed higher, unfurling into thousands of slender stems of gold, each tipped with a leaf of molten glass. They bent in unison, listening for something beyond sound. Asa rose to her feet. The glow bathed her face, and she could feel the seed's pulse sinking with her own. "It's listening," she whispered, "waiting for what comes next." Corey looked at her, then at the horizon, where dawn trembled uncertainly behind thin clouds. "It wants the sun," he said. Hrefna smiled weakly. "Then give it what we've made of morning." The wolf lifted its muzzle and howled again, a long, rising tone that stitched the world's edges together. Corey joined him, and this time Asa added her flute's voice to theirs. The ashwood instrument, now alive with light, sang on its own, a soft, breathing chord that carried both sorrow and joy. The crater answered. The sleeping light stirred fully awake. From its heart rose a column of radiance, neither fire nor flame, but something gentler, warmth woven into form. It climbed skyward, brushing the underside of clouds. The dawn caught it, accepted it, and for the first time in all creation, day broke without breaking anything else. They stood together, watching the new tree of light root itself into the bones of the earth and the ribs of the sky. Corey whispered, "It's growing." Asa lowered the flute. "No," she said softly. "We are." The wolf lay down beside them, eyes closing in peace. Hrefna's breathing slowed, each exhale lighter, fainter, as if the tree were reclaiming its borrowed voice. Above them, the sky changed color by color, not perfectly, not evenly, but beautifully alive. The world, at last, remembered how to begin. Each morning now begins like a shy confession. The air seems to blush before light touches it. The dew clings longer than it should, reluctant to yield. Soul's daughter rises not as her mother once did, not in fire and command, but with the trembling courage of someone learning to live in her own light. Her dawns are uneven. Some arrive late, soft and pale as breath on glass. Others blaze across the horizon too quickly, spilling gold with the enthusiasm of inexperience. There are mornings when she hesitates behind a thin veil of cloud, as though unsure she's wanted, and others when she bursts forth in laughter, scattering color across the sky without restraint. Yet each dawn arrives, imperfect, sincere, and unashamed, and the world accepts her rhythm. No one expects perfection anymore. The farmers of the thawed plains pause in their work each morning, hands resting on their tools, faces turned skyward. They do not pray as their ancestors once did. They simply whisper thanks. The sun's return is no longer a miracle, just a promise kept, and that makes it all the more sacred. Children point to the crooked bands of color that spill across the heavens, uneven arcs of rose, amber, and green, and call them laughing scars. Their teachers smile and don't correct them. The phrase feels right. Even the mountains, dark and patient, seem to bow as the light touches their peaks, catching the warmth with quiet pride. Each day she rises, the seed remembers. Its light is spread, invisible yet everywhere, threading through roots and rivers, through veins of leaves, through words spoken in kindness and promises kept. It doesn't grow like a tree anymore, but like trust, unseen until needed, unbreakable once shared. Every vow honored, every forgiveness given, every small act of decency nourishes it. The world breathes not because of gods, but because its people have learned to keep their word. Corey walks the rivers he once sang awake. Though his voice is silent, villages gather when he visits, eager to see the man who taught thunder to sleep. He carries a staff carved with spirals of ashwood, its surface etched with verses, small poems about storms that learn to rest. He leaves them wherever he goes, words carved into stone, bark, and memory. His silence teaches better than sound ever could. Hrefna tends the valleys where wind once spoke to her. She can no longer hear its songs, but the air bends around her gently, like an old friend who doesn't need words to be understood. The villagers say that when she breathes, the fields settle, the flocks calm, and even quarrels soften. Children follow her, laughing, and the grass under her feet grows a little greener. They call her the keeper of still harvests, though she claims she's done nothing but listen to quiet properly. Brinjar lives by the sea now, in a cabin built from driftwood and patience. He mends boats with hands that no longer tremble. He keeps no trophies, no reminders of his old life, only the sound of waves striking shore. Travelers who pass by his workshops swear they've seen him speaking to the ocean, and that sometimes the tide rises to meet his words. They say his eyes hold the same light as a new dawn, weathered, kind, enduring. And Asa, keeper, wanderer, oath-sharer, travels between them all. She carries stories instead of fire now, though her eyes still hold the ember's glow. She no longer guards a seed. She teaches others that it already lives within them. Where she walks, peace follows quietly. Her laughter, once rare, comes easily now. The sound of relief turned into melody. What had once been burden became language, and that language took root everywhere she went. The wolf still walks beside her. Its fur has turned silver at the tips, like moonlight caught in motion. Its eyes are twin mirrors of the world it helped mend, patient, knowing, kind. It no longer hunts alone. Wherever it travels, villages leave out bread and bowls of milk. In return, it guards their dreams, pacing silently through the fields until dawn. At every meal shared between wolves and people, a ritual forms, not written but remembered. They break bread together, half in caution, half in faith. The first crumbs are always left with shadows, an old gesture of gratitude to the night that still makes dawn possible. When twilight comes, Soul's daughter sinks behind the horizon. She never swears to return. She promises, softly. Her warmth lingers like a held breath over the world, a reminder that endings and beginnings are only different kinds of continuance. Children chase their reflections in the rivers that now run true, laughing at the light bending on the surface. Fishermen cast their nets and return with both fish and peace of mind. The stars blink awake without fear of her glow. They have learned at last that night and day are kin. And somewhere, in the crater where the first seed had been planted, the ashwood tree hums in its sleep. Its leaves glow faintly in alternating colors, gold and violet, shadow and shimmer. The air around it vibrates with a low, steady hum, the pulse of the new age. Some nights, wanderers where they can hear the roots whisper beneath the soil, not words, but promise that all things will one day meet again. The people have no name for this age yet. They call it nothing, but they know what it feels like. Forgiveness with roots, a peace that doesn't erase pain, but transforms it into foundation. When the wind moves through the tree's leaves, it sounds almost like speech, the soft, sibilant murmur of the world speaking to itself. And if you listen closely, with heart as still as dawn, you might hear what it says each morning. Rise again. Imperfect, brave. And so it does. The wolves watch. The people share bread. The age begins again. And somewhere, high above the waking world, the new sun pauses for just a moment, trembling, learning still, and smiles upon it all. When the new tree's light had rooted deep enough to steady the trembling world, silence settled, not absence, but balance. It was then that the price came due. No god demanded it. The cost arose naturally, like gravity reclaiming what had been briefly defied. Creation always collects its debts, and those who helped remake it felt the tug one by one. Corey was the first to notice. He stood at the edge of the crater, watching dawn ripple across the horizon. The air still shimmered with music, the echoes of the song he'd sung into the seed. But when he tried to hum again, no sound came. His throat moved, but his voice was gone, stolen by the melody he had offered to the world. He touched his neck, panic rising. "Asa!" She turned, eyes soft, understanding before he even gestured. "It took your voice," Iravel whispered. Corey shook his head slowly. He mouthed words, testing them. The sound would not come, but the meaning remained. His lips shaped the sentence, and though no one heard it, all understood it. The song stays. I don't need to sing it to know it. He smiled, silent but unbroken. His hands traced shapes in the air, new gestures, new language. Where his voice had been, purpose bloomed instead. Hrefna was next. She had knelt by the roots, her ear pressed to the earth, listening for the murmur she'd always heard. The wind between stones, the whisper of leaves telling secrets of the tree. But the sounds were gone. She straightened, blinking. "It's quiet," she said, almost disbelieving. She turned her face to the breeze, but it touched her without speaking. The communion that had once linked her to every motion of air had ended. Asa reached for her hand. "I'm sorry." Hrefna shook her head. "Don't be. The quiet isn't empty. It's kind." She smiled faintly, placing a palm to her heart. "I still feel what the wind means, even if I can't hear what it says. It's enough." Her calm deepened, not the stillness of loss, but of acceptance. The voice of Yggdrasil had left her, but its peace remained. Then Brinjar. He had kept to himself during the dawning hours, sitting cross-legged beside the wolf, staring at the horizon. His axe lay on the ground beside him, the blade dull, forgotten. Around his neck hung a cord where the pendant had once been. Now it carried nothing. When he rose, his movements were lighter, unguarded. "Everything I saved," he said quietly, "is gone. The trophies, the relics, the fragment of who I was." Asa studied him. "And what remains?" He placed a hand over his chest. "Something that doesn't rust." He smiled, a small, steady thing that felt like sunlight through smoke. A heart that beats without asking why. He walked to the glowing roots and pressed both hands to the earth. For the first time, the world pulsed back in rhythm with him, heart to heart. Finally, Asa. She stood alone at the center of the crater, where the ashwood flute had become part of the living tree. The seed's light pulsed faintly within its hollow trunk, a gentle breath between worlds. The oath she had carried, the vow to guard, to guide, to remember, rose up in her chest, heavier now. Hel's words returned to her. "Carry your chaos well." She had promised to bear the ember until the world remembered how to burn. That promise had not ended. It had changed shape. The fire no longer belonged only to her. Asa pressed a hand to the living bark. "You're awake now," she whispered, "but you'll need keepers." She turned to her companions, to Corey, Hrefna, Brinjar, to the wolf lying watchful in the light. "I swore to protect the seed," she said. "That oath isn't mine anymore. It's ours." They understood. Corey bowed his head, silent but smiling. Hrefna nodded once, calm as stone in sunlight. Brinjar placed his palm over hers upon the bark, their fingers intertwining in silent covenant. The wolf lifted its gaze, eyes twin mirrors of dawn, and added its own vow with a quiet rumble. So long as breath remembers breath. The light beneath their hands brightened. The oath, once a burden on a single heart, divided itself, fourfold, fivefold, flowing into every soul that had carried it this far. The air trembled with renewal. Corey looked up at the sky, color spilling gently across it like water finding old paths. Hrefna breathed the wind she could no longer hear, her calm radiating outward in invisible ripples. Brinjar's steady heartbeat echoed faintly in the earth, syncing with the pulse of the new tree. And Asa, no longer the lone bearer but the first among many, felt her chest lighten for the first time in years. The oath she had guarded for the gods had become a promise shared among mortals. "Then let it grow," she whispered. Above them, The new sun shifted in its place, adjusting its glow until every shadow found its angle, every color its hue. The world's breath evened, the balance held, and though each had given something up to reach this peace, none of them felt diminished. Loss, it seemed, was no longer subtraction, but the shape left open for light to enter. Each morning now begins like a shy confession. The air seems to blush before light touches it. The dew clings longer than it should, reluctant to yield. Soul's daughter rises not as her mother once did, not in fire and command, but with the trembling courage of someone learning to live in her own light. Her dawns are uneven. Some arrive late, soft and pale as breath on glass. Others blaze across the horizon too quickly, spilling gold with the enthusiasm of inexperience. There are mornings when she hesitates behind a thin veil of cloud, as though unsure she's wanted, and others when she bursts forth in laughter, scattering color across the sky without restraint. Yet each dawn arrives, imperfect, sincere, and unashamed, and the world accepts her rhythm. No one expects perfection anymore. The farmers of the thawed plains pause in their work each morning, hands resting on their tools, faces turned skyward. They do not pray as their ancestors once did. They simply whisper thanks. The sun's return is no longer a miracle, just a promise kept, and that makes it all the more sacred. Children point to the crooked bands of color that spill across the heavens, uneven arcs of rose, amber, and green, and call them laughing scars. Their teachers smile and don't correct them. The phrase feels right. Even the mountains, dark and patient, seem to bow as the light touches their peaks, catching the warmth with quiet pride. Each day she rises, the seed remembers. Its light is spread, invisible yet everywhere, threading through roots and rivers, through veins of leaves, through words spoken in kindness and promises kept. It doesn't grow like a tree anymore, but like trust, unseen until needed, unbreakable once shared. Every vow honored, every forgiveness given, every small act of decency nourishes it. The world breathes not because of gods, but because its people have learned to keep their word. Corey walks the rivers he once sang awake. Though his voice is silent, villages gather when he visits, eager to see the man who taught thunder to sleep. He carries a staff carved with spirals of ashwood, its surface etched with verses, small poems about storms that learn to rest. He leaves them wherever he goes, words carved into stone, bark, and memory. His silence teaches better than sound ever could. Grefna tends the valleys where wind once spoke to her. She can no longer hear its songs, but the air bends around her gently, like an old friend who doesn't need words to be understood. The villagers say that when she breathes, the fields settle, the flocks calm, and even quarrels soften. Children follow her, laughing, and the grass under her feet grows a little greener. They call her the keeper of still harvests, though she claims she's done nothing but listen to quiet properly. Brinjar lives by the sea now, in a cabin built from driftwood and patience. He mends boats with hands that no longer tremble. He keeps no trophies, no reminders of his old life, only the sound of waves striking shore. Travelers who pass by his workshop swear they've seen him speaking to the ocean, and that sometimes the tide rises to meet his words. They say his eyes hold the same light as a new dawn, weathered, kind, enduring. And Asa, keeper, wanderer, oath-sharer, travels between them all. She carries stories instead of fire now, though her eyes still hold the ember's glow. She no longer guards a seed. She teaches others that it already lives within them. Where she walks, peace follows quietly. Her laughter, once rare, comes easily now. The sound of relief turned into melody. What had once been burden became language, and that language took root everywhere she went. The wolf still walks beside her. Its fur has turned silver at the tips, like moonlight caught in motion. Its eyes are twin mirrors of the world it helped mend, patient, knowing, kind. It no longer hunts alone. Wherever it travels, villages leave out bread and bowls of milk. In return, it guards their dreams, pacing silently through the fields until dawn. At every meal shared between wolves and people, a ritual forms, not written but remembered. They break bread together, half in caution, half in faith. The first crumbs are always left with shadows, an old gesture of gratitude to the night that still makes dawn possible. When twilight comes, Sol's daughter sinks behind the horizon. She never swears to return. She promises, softly. Her warmth lingers like a held breath over the world, a reminder that endings and beginnings are only different kinds of continuance. Children chase their reflections in the rivers that now run true, laughing at the light bending on the surface. Fishermen cast their nets and return with both fish and peace of mind. The stars blink awake without fear of her glow. They have learned at last that night and day are kin. And somewhere, in the crater where the first seed had been planted, the ashwood tree hums in its sleep. Its leaves glow faintly in alternating colors, gold and violet, shadow and shimmer. The air around it vibrates with a low, steady hum, the pulse of the new age. Some nights, wanderers where they can hear the roots whisper beneath the soil, not words, but promise that all things will one day meet again. The people have no name for this age yet. They call it nothing, but they know what it feels like. Forgiveness with roots, a peace that doesn't erase pain, but transforms it into foundation. When the wind moves through the tree's leaves, it sounds almost like speech, the soft, sibilant murmur of the world speaking to itself. And if you listen closely, with heart as still as dawn, you might hear what it says each morning. Rise again, imperfect, brave. And so it does. The wolves watch. The people share bread. The age begins again. And somewhere, high above the waking world, the new sun pauses for just a moment, trembling, learning still, and smiles upon all.